Okay, Mr. Mayor, the live stream is going. We're ready to begin.
Okay. Good evening. Let's call to order the council meeting of March 7th, 2022. Before we get started, I'd like to remind participants of some procedural items for this meeting. During the meeting, participants will remain muted when not speaking. If participants have a question or a comment, please use the raised hand feature. Speakers will be called upon to speak one at a time. The City Council meeting is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means as allowed by Government Code Subdivision 54953E and Resolution number 1089-21, reaffirmed by Sunnyvale City Council on February 22nd, 2022. Members of the public may provide audio public comment by connecting to the teleconference meeting online or by telephone and use the raised hand feature to request to speak, *9 on your telephone. Teleconference meeting details are available on the council agenda. Captions are available to viewers accessing this meeting via Zoom. Captions can be displayed or hidden using the live transcript button in Zoom. Comments on agenda items must be submitted prior to the time I close the public hearing on the agenda item. Speakers are requested to keep their comments to no more than 90 seconds, and time limits will be strictly enforced. Guidelines are posted on the city's website and on the council meeting agenda. First up is our roll call. City Clerk, may we please have a roll call?
Mayor Klein.
Present.
Vice Mayor Cisneros.
Present.
Councilmember Larson.
Present.
Councilmember Hendricks.
Attending.
Councilmember Melton.
Present.
Councilmember Dean.
Present.
Councilmember Spitaleri.
Present.
7 present participating via teleconference.
Thank you. Let's move on to our workshop. Our one item is item 22-0062, the Moffett Park Specific Plan Open Space and Urban Ecology Workshop. Is there a staff report?
Yes, there is. Thank you, Mayor Klein and Council. We're delighted to be back in the workshop format, which we initiated, I think, a little over a year ago, specifically for Moffett Park, and we hope to use it in other situations. We have the workshop for you this evening, and we have 2 or 3 more additional workshops or study sessions before we will be ready to complete the actual specific plan document, the updated specific plan document, and the associated draft environmental impact report. So that will be this summer. So you can see in the next few months, we probably have a little bit of time that we'll be spending together. So I just wanted to give you that background. I was going to introduce someone, but I can't see if it doesn't look like he's on the call yet. So I will reserve that for another time. So you have something to look forward to. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle King, who's the project manager for the Moffett Park Specific Plan Update. Michelle?
Thanks, Trudy. Appreciate the introduction. And today's meeting is going to have a couple different sections to it. So we're going to start off the meeting with a presentation, and that's going to be including materials from several consultants. So I'm going to introduce some of them now, so you know who's speaking when I hand it over. So it'll be Chris Sensenig from Raymond Associates, who's been one of the major consultant teams working on this project. Chris Goulard from CMG Landscape Architecture, and Robin Grossinger from SFEI, San Francisco Estuary Institute. So if you hear me hand over this presentation during the meeting to those folks, they are part of a larger consultant team working on this very interdisciplinary, project that has a lot of different components. So today's meeting's focus is open space and urban ecology. This is a workshop format. We're gonna go over the urban ecology aspect of the Moffett Park Specific Plan and what we've been working on since the last time we talked about urban ecology with the council. And we're going to talk about some of the specific items and issues regarding open space for the plan that we are currently working through. There's going to be a roundtable discussion in which questions from the public will be presented, and a consultant team will help answer some of those questions. In between these items of the agenda, there's going to be some Mentimeter live polling. So there will be points in this presentation where you will be introduced to Mentimeter if you haven't used it before. We'll explain the process of Mentimeter, and then we'll do live polling at different points in the presentation and on different aspects of the presentation. After the interactive public meeting, we will then hand it over to the council for the study session portion of the evening. Next slide. So the purpose of today's meeting is to give the council and the public an update on the Moffitt Park specific plan process and schedule, to do a high-level review of some of the principles and the vision for Moffitt Park and how it relates to the work we're doing, present materials on open space and urban ecology, and the policy framework that we're building for the plan, and answer questions from council members and the public and get and receive feedback. Next slide. During this presentation, you're going to see these blue slides. These are sort of stopping points to give you information on input we're looking for during the presentation and during the study session. So we won't actually ask you to speak to these items when you see these blue slides, but these blue slides will give you an idea of some of the very specific things we're hoping to get feedback on during the evening. And just a high-level review of those are to talk about the open space goals of the plan as we're presenting it to you, and how the park typology, draft park typologies are coming together, and get feedback on those typologies. We're going to be asking you about the potential to remove some roadway in the plan area that would add more open space and create district connectivity, as well as park area. We'll be talking about policy guidance on multi-use fields in the plan area. We'll be speaking about potential setbacks along the east and west channels to create new open space and urban ecology areas. We'll be discussing the creation of an ecological overlay zone in Moffitt Park. We'll do a review of the conceptual open space network for the entire plan area, and talk about the target for the publicly accessible open space within Moffitt Park specific plan. Next slide. So how do we get to where we are today? We've conducted several studies that are available on our website that will be showing up in the next couple slides, including urban ecology, a sea level rise study, and other technical studies for the environmental review document. We've had many working meetings with stakeholders and our technical members of our technical working group, including adjacent agencies and other overseeing state and federal groups that we wanted to make sure were part of this process. We've had many meetings with stakeholders and environmental groups. We've conducted surveys through the website. We've had live meetings prior to the change in the meeting format due to COVID. We had public meetings. We got public input in those meetings, and we also received public input through the website. We've also had public hearings in the past, and we intend to have not only a series of study sessions this spring and summer, but also a series of public hearings once the draft plan is released in late summer, early fall. So next slide. So today's meeting, there's an opportunity for public input through the live polling, through Mentimeter, through the roundtable discussion, through public comment, and then we'll be holding office hours during the noon hour of Tuesday, March 15th, and you can be able to find that information on our Moffitt Park specific plan website, how to participate in that noon hour informational interactive office time with staff and the consultant team. And then we're also going to have a series, like I mentioned, of study sessions and public hearings rolling out through 2022. Next slide. I'm going to hand over the Mentimeter discussion to Chris Sensenig from Ramey & Associates to explain how it all works.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So we're going to gather public input throughout the project here and during the roundtable discussion through mentimeter.com. So if you go to a browser or another device like your phone and go to menti.com, you will get a link to put in a code. The code for today's meeting is 1334 5267. I'll give you a moment to put that up, but we're going to ask, start off with a few general questions that we've been asking throughout the plan process. And again, you go to menti.com and type in the code 13345267. All right. So we're going to start with some live polling here. And the first question is, how did you hear about this event? Please select all that apply. Thank you. We're seeing most people get the city publications and announcements. Way to go, City of Sunnyvale, and getting the word out. All right. Thank you. Moving on to the second question. We just have a series of demographic questions here to make sure we're getting a good cross section of the city in our outreach. All right, continuing to move on. How would you describe yourself? Please choose more than one option if you identify with more than one of names on the list. All right. Next, we want to know where you live. We're coming to get you. Oh man. Okay, one from Cupertino and one from Mountain View. All right, majority from Sunnyvale, great. And lastly, we'd like to understand where you work. All right, now we're going to move on to a few more interesting questions. Oops, I'm sorry. I think I lost my slide. Michelle, are you seeing the slide deck or the Mentimeter?
Slide deck.
Where did my Mentimeter go? Aha. Here we go. Sorry about that. First off, what are the most important land uses you would like to see in Moffett Park? All right, housing is sitting there consistently at number 1. And then our topics for today are sitting at 2 and 3. All right, thank you. I think we have a quorum of answers here. All right, this is an open-ended question. Where do you go to experience nature in the Bay Area? Please type in your answer and hit enter. All right. Baylands, some people headed to Santa Cruz and the coast. All right, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the last question for this section. What is your favorite open space, park, and public space or trail in the Bay Area? Nice, Mint Plaza. Chris from CMG will be excited to hear that. Bay Trail. All right. Well, thank you all for that input. We greatly appreciate it. I'm going to let this continue to go, but turn it back over to the presentation, and we'll have some more questions towards the end of the session. All
Thanks,
right.
Chris. Thank you so much. So this section of the presentation is to just review, where we are with Moffett Park as far as the vision and the principles for the plan area. So the last time we spoke with council, we added a little bit of language to this vision, but the vision as of now is that Moffett Park is an integral part of Sunnyvale and is a well-connected ecological innovation district with a diverse mix of uses that serve as a model of resilience, climate protection, equity, and economic opportunity. Next slide. When we heard from council in May of 2021, we got direction to study a particular mix of land uses, including residential and additional office and supportive retail and other services. So this map represents these new potential land uses and 20,000 residential uses in the orange and light orange areas, which are the mixed use activity centers and residential, with office R&D in the blue, and a hatched designation represent areas that could be flexible residential or office. We have been working very hard on this direction, and in the next month or two, you're going to be seeing the newest version of this land use map, which is a much more refined version with some changes, but represents the general direction we got from council. I'll also just remind people where the Moffett Park specific plan boundary is. This is the boundary of the existing plan that we're updating, which ends at the northwest portion, mostly along Caribbean, with some of the Lockheed campus, the north end, included in the plan area. It does not include the landfill hills or the ponds that serve the wastewater treatment plant or adjacent to the plan area. It also doesn't include the Baylands Park at the northeast section of the plan. Next slide. So there are two big factors that are helping create this plan. One is really working on becoming an innovation district and what that means as far as creating incentive and space for new and leading edge technologies. And then also focusing on the eco district aspect of the plan and focusing on sustainable development, including the development of the neighborhood and its scale and the infrastructure that would serve that neighborhood, and looking at how urban ecology can also be a really integral and important part of how Moffett Park provides an environment for both innovation and the people that will eventually live there, and the community of Sunnyvale in general. Next slide. So there were 7 guiding principles that we have brought to the council a couple different times. I'm just going to review 5 and 6 because out of the 7, 2 are really focused on urban ecology and open space and what they mean for the community. And so number 5 was to create a healthy, resilient, and biodiverse environment. And the details of that include looking at creating a diverse and high quality street and open space network, looking for interactions in that network for socialization, recreation, ecological value, and human health, connecting people to nature and the bay, which is directly adjacent to the plan area, and creating a broad range of publicly accessible open space with types and amenities. Next slide. So number 6 was to create a healthy, resilient, and biodiverse environment. So looking at enhancing the ecosystems in the plan area to support biodiversity, looking for opportunities to restore biological function and habitat quality, creating a robust urban forest in the plan area, which would really help with the increase in canopy cover, looking for nature-based solutions and hybrid infrastructure when thinking about resilience, and that could include ecological areas that also serve as retention, identifying and identity and attraction to the plan area based on urban ecology. So when we saw that list of where people go in the Bay Area, we saw a few people go to the Bay Trail, really capitalizing on that and having this area of Sunnyvale be a destination for people that are interested in experiencing urban ecology. Next slide. So there's some basic tenets on how urban ecology can improve the Moffett Park area and improve many areas that are heavily urbanized. So looking at sort of these 3 main elements, creating this biodiversity in the plan area, using the opportunity of new open space areas to create urban ecology and supportive environments, including urban ecology patches and hubs, creating areas that contribute to climate resilience, including the forest canopy and water retention, and reducing the amount of impervious surface and reflective surfaces in the plan area. And these things adding up to creating a more healthy and safe place for people to be, including reducing temperatures in the plan area, reducing human stress, creating better social interaction, and also capitalizing on all of these things to actually help the economic health of the plan area. Next slide. So when we talk about connecting people in urban ecology and just ecology in general, we talk about the way where Moffett Park is placed is really in an amazing environment that could really only not only enhance the urban ecology that's there, but get more people to interact with that urban ecology. So this slide gives you a little idea of sort of the larger network that's happening around Moffett Park and what we're trying to accomplish as far as interacting with that network. Next slide. So the next section is going to be focused on the open space aspect of the draft plan that we're working through. And Chris Gillard from CMG Landscape is going to take over for the next set of slides and talk about open space.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to go ahead and start by setting the stage for this evening's discussion by talking about what we mean by open space. In 2018, California responded to changing needs and conditions by establishing its own broad and innovative definition of open space. And for the purposes of Moffett Park, we're proposing a similarly broad and inclusive approach to the definition, which is that open spaces include areas that serve the community by providing public access, recreational and cultural programs, ecosystem services, and they may include undeveloped natural areas, areas of ecological value, greenways and trails, recreation areas, community and neighborhood parks, places of cultural significance, and public plazas and squares. So it's a very broad definition, and they may be publicly owned and managed or privately owned and publicly accessible spaces. Next. So thinking about open space within Moffett Park, it's important first to consider the open space context. And there are several significant regional open space assets and opportunities directly adjacent to, but outside of the plan area. And these open spaces provide important context for the programming of parks within the district. And they include, most importantly, the Baylands Park, which is a joint venture between Santa Clara County, which owns the property, and the city, which manages and maintains the park. The Twin Creeks Sports Complex, which is a privately operated sports facility with 10 lighted all-purpose fields and a clubhouse. Michelle mentioned the capped former landfill open spaces, which are designated as special use areas and include approximately 100 acres of undeveloped open space and 2 golf courses located at the north and southwest corners of the plan area. Equally important are the San Francisco Bay Trail and the Bayland open spaces within the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. Next. Another critical consideration when it comes to planning for open space within the plan area is the connections to active transportation and neighborhoods adjacent to the plan area. And so, really importantly is looking at proposed connections to the Bay Trail and the other trails within the Don Edwards area, looking for connections at the East Channel, a potential connection to the south. That's number 2 there. Leveraging the existing bike and pedestrian connection at Borregas, number 3, and then a potential future crossing at Mary Avenue to provide connections to the south and link Sunnyvale with the district and the bay. Next. Currently, there are no designated public open spaces or parks within the specific plan area. However, there are a number of green spaces that can be leveraged as part of an open space and ecological network. And these include the stormwater ponds, seasonal wetlands, and open space areas at the northwest corner of Moffett Park, the east and west channels, which are owned and operated by Valley Water. The channels do not currently include public access improvements. However, the city of Sunnyvale has a memorandum of understanding with Valley Water to allow for public access and multi-use trails, which are being considered as part of the planning and design of flood control improvements. And these areas can be included as part of the open space network to preserve and improve habitat, provide increased stormwater management, and public access. Next. Another important consideration in the planning process is, of course, current city policy and public open space goals. And the most important guiding document in that regard is the Parks of the Future study and plan that was completed in 2009. I'd just like to highlight a few of the policy recommendations in that plan that are most relevant to Moffett Park. And the first is the level of service, which is a simple metric of the amount of open space per resident. And the current citywide target is 5.34 acres per 1,000 residents. Another key goal outlined in that plan was the addition of neighborhood parks, the development of 2 new community parks citywide, pursuing opportunities for trail development along the east and west channels, additional programming for teens and adults, and increased programming for special events and cultural celebrations, nature programs, outdoor active recreation, and programs for older adults. Next. In terms of policy benchmarks and metrics, I'd like to share a little context here. I mentioned the general plan requirement for the level of service, and that's complemented by the subdivision planning code requirement of 5 acres per 1,000 residents, and the more recent Lawrence Station specific plan, which also included 5 acres per 1,000 residents. And then in terms of local regional benchmarks, Mountain View's policy is 3 acres per 1,000 residents. The North Bayshore Mountain View specific plan or precise plan included approximately 3 acres per 1,000 residents. The city of Santa Clara is at 2.53. The related Santa Clara project is 4.6, and Warm Springs Innovation District at 5. And all of those are generally within this broader national metric by the National Recreation and Park Association of 4 to 6 acres per 1,000 residents. Next. So key factors in determining how much open space are clearly about the amount of park area and the location of that park area to provide access and walkability, state and national standards, enough area to adequately serve future growth in terms of the mix of uses in the district, and then specific improvements expected in the plan area. Next. So I'd like to share a few of the principles and goals that are guiding the open space planning and policy. And of course, these are all supportive of the broader vision and overall plan goals that Michelle outlined. So first and foremost, that the open spaces within Moffitt Park are welcoming, welcoming all to Sunnyvale's bayfront destination, that the open spaces connect people to nature in the bay and create multi-generational invitations with affordable public uses, amenities, and services. Second, that they're connected, that the open spaces simultaneously serve as part of the active transportation network, encouraging active lifestyles, that the open spaces are accessible and provide multi-generational opportunities for residents, employees, and visitors throughout the district, that they're social, which is that the open spaces meet the Urban Land Institute's standards of quality of parks by creating adaptable, inviting spaces for recreation, socialization, connection, and reflection, that they are healthy by creating restorative environments that provide opportunities to connect with nature, provide opportunities for fitness and recreation, and contribute to other public health benefits such as cleaner air, cooler microclimates, and spaces for community gathering. And lastly, that they're biodiverse and resilient by providing increased canopy cover, integrating stormwater management and adaptive native plantings, and large habitat patches with connected corridors to promote biodiversity and resilience to climate change. Next. So all of these come together with more specific objectives or goals, which are to create a network of greenways and parks that are part of the active transportation system, that are well distributed and located adjacent to transit, activity, and community centers, that provide a diversity of social, recreational, and cultural programs that address the desire to increase biodiversity, connectivity, and habitat, and allow for a co-location with potential school sites within the district. And lastly, that they're connected to the adjacent neighborhoods, the Bay Trail, Baylands Park, and Morse Tasman. Next. So the open space network within the plan area will include a diverse mix of park and open space types, including green belts and ecological corridors, natural areas or ecological patches, community parks, neighborhood parks, mini parks, plazas, and squares. And it's worth noting that these types are consistent with those defined in the city's Parks of the Future plan. And I would say that the primary distinction is the emphasis on urban ecology and biodiversity, which we'll discuss in more detail later, and the idea of very multifunctional open spaces that serve more than one purpose. So let's take a look at the general scale and program associated with each type. Next. So the first type of green belts or ecological corridors, the scale of these is ranging from 40 to 300 feet in width. And the potential program includes multi-use trails with separated bikeways where appropriate, pedestrian pathways, small gathering and seating areas, and urban ecology with interpretive programs that could include both history and ecology. Next. Natural areas or ecological patches are a scale of a minimum of 2 acres, but up to 10 acres and plus. And here the emphasis of program is on the preservation and or restoration of habitat, multi-use trails, nature trails and bird watching, picnicking, and limited public and pet access. Next is community parks, which range in scale from 9 to 20 acres and really are intended to serve the entire community and district. Potential programs for community parks include destination play spaces, active recreation courts and fields, civic cultural event spaces, picnic areas, potential co-location with school sites, stormwater treatment, and urban ecology. Then at a finer grain, neighborhood parks, which range in scale from 3 to 8 acres and are really focused on serving a neighborhood area. These programs include smaller play spaces, picnic areas, court sports, community gathering and event spaces, potentially community gardens, dog parks, and fitness spaces. Next. And then mini parks, plazas, and paseos are really focused on integration with the activity centers within the mixed use districts. And these could range in scale from a quarter up to an acre. They're really intended to serve the neighborhood, but they'll also serve as citywide destinations. The programs here are really focused on community events and gatherings like markets and festivals, cultural events and performances, outdoor dining areas, seating areas, and potentially tot lots. Next. So the vision for parks and open space builds on the existing green spaces associated with the west and east channels and the seasonal wetland area at the northwest corner to create an interconnected network of public open spaces of different types and scales. And I really want to emphasize this concept of a network of spaces that are integrated with active transportation and provide a diverse mix of programs, experiences, and ecological value. The seasonal wetlands at the northwest corner are incorporated in a large natural area and biodiversity hub. The west and east channel open spaces are expanded and enhanced as greenbelts and ecological corridors. 2 larger parks in purple are located adjacent to the channels and are linked by a series of gracious neighborhood parks aligned with Caspian Drive to create a continuous park that links the major activity centers and residential neighborhoods. And then the mini parks and plazas in orange will provide important social and cultural gathering spaces in each of the mixed use activity centers, one at Borregas and the other at Crossman in the east. Across the lower portion, you'll see the diagonal, which is envisioned as a pedestrian-oriented urban promenade that will connect a series of open spaces from Matilda Avenue in the southwest to the East Community Park and on to Baylands Park. And then a series of neighborhood parks and ecological patches are proposed south of Java and west of Matilda to support residential and mixed-use areas there. Together, this network of open spaces will be a critical part of the transformation of Moffett Park into a vibrant and livable ecological district. Next. I'd like to now share an overview of several of the key open spaces and features in the proposed plan, beginning with the larger parks located along the east and west channels. Next. One of the key constraints in the development of open space within the district is the fact that all the land is privately owned. Throughout the planning process, the city has been coordinating with key property owners to identify open space opportunities. And the good news is that several have agreed in principle to provide open spaces that are consistent with the city's size requirements for a community park. The West Park is approximately 14 to 16 acres in size, and the East Park is approximately 9 to 10 acres in size. And each will be large enough to provide a wide range of recreational and social programs and serve as part of the ecological program. The West Park, which is located adjacent to the Borregas Activity Center, is envisioned to have a focus on social and recreational programs along with ecology, while the East Park is envisioned as an eco park that prioritizes habitat creation, stormwater management, and respite. Next. As a point of reference, Ponderosa Park in Sunnyvale is approximately 12 acres, excluding the schoolyard, and Washington Park is around 11 acres. Next. So here's the first set of key considerations that we're looking for feedback on, which is an overview of each of the topics that we went through, focused on the park typology. Next, I'd like to talk about the vision for Caspian Park and Promenade, which links the two larger parks from east to west. And as you can see here next, the proposed width of the park and promenade ranges from 150 to 335 feet, which will provide ample space for pedestrian and bicycle circulation and a mix of recreational and social programs. The existing Caspian right-of-way is 66 feet wide and 2.5 acres in area. And the proposed plan would vacate that right-of-way and transfer it to open space. A new and narrower 50-foot laneway will be required on the south edge of the open space between Borregas and Geneva. And the Caspian Park and Promenade holds great potential to include a diversity of programs and neighborhood spaces linked by a promenade. Next. So here you can see the existing condition of Caspian Drive with the 66-foot right-of-way and the large building setbacks. Next. And the proposed condition with the 50-foot laneway on the south edge and generous linear park space of 150 to 335 feet. Next. Second consideration is focused on the removal of the Caspian Drive right-of-way to integrate it into the open space and increase district connectivity. The next policy area I'd like to touch on is related to athletic and multi-use field policies. And throughout the planning process, the team has had multiple conversations with the Parks Department regarding parks programming and specifically the need for athletic fields. And based on those discussions and feedback gathered during the community surveys, we've developed the following proposal for multi-use fields within the plan area. The first policy is to provide a minimum of one large field or flexible recreation area of 50 to 100 yards in size. Second, to have a minimum of 3 smaller open field or flexible areas of 35 to 65 yards in size, with guidance to increase the quantity of flex field space when and where possible. And the intent is really to provide flexible open spaces that will allow for a variety of informal field sports, community events, and gatherings. Next. The following show the potential locations for multi-use fields that have been identified based on the sizes of the proposed sizes of the park. And the larger fields could be located within the park, within the Navy site, or at the larger park at the west end of Caspian Promenade, with smaller fields located in community parks and neighborhood parks south of Java on the diagonal. Next. So we're looking for some additional feedback on guidance of the multi-use fields within the plan area. Next. I think at this point, we're gonna transition into a deeper discussion of urban ecology within the district.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So hello again. I am going to review some of the key urban ecology strategies, including some specific topics around stormwater ponds in the northwest corner of Moffett Park and the east and west Sunnyvale channels. Along with us today, we are joined by Robin Gossinger and Karen Verpeet from the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and they are scientists that have been supporting our effort in Moffett Park and will be available to answer questions later in the workshop during the roundtable discussion and the study session. So urban ecology and climate resilience are core to the transformation of Moffett Park into an ecological innovation district. Key to that is maintaining functioning urban ecosystems that can significantly improve human health and well-being and help contribute to the climate change mitigation and adaptation. That includes increasing the size, connectivity, and types of open spaces within Moffett Park to create an integrated matrix of urban ecology features. Here you can see ways that the matrix quality can help achieve the goals of creating an ecological district. The more you integrate green spaces and native species within an urban environment, biodiversity increases, and maybe even a reduction in common urban residents like crows. I know this is a big thing here. There is also less of a heat island effect and a healthier environment for all species, including employees and residents. All right, so how are we applying these urban ecology principles and policies into the specific plan? It starts with standards and guidelines for increasing the ecological value of all open spaces, from streets to plazas to natural areas. We also believe access to nature is important in the plan area, so we are increasing accessibility for all is key to the open space policies that Chris reviewed earlier. Directly, we are creating a network of biodiversity hubs, which are large green spaces greater than 10 acres in size, and also habitat patches, which are green spaces greater than 2 acres in size. The ecological patches will be integrated into a matrix of urban ecology. This includes connecting the patches and hubs, enhancing the ecological values of the channels, increasing the urban forest through a network of streets with continuous canopy cover and wide building setbacks outside of activity centers to increase planting areas. Standards will also be in the plan for the quality and impact of landscaping for both public and private open spaces. And the plan will also include an integrated stormwater management throughout the plan area. So here you can see how the urban ecology matrix may lay over the plan area. Biodiversity hubs are located at the stormwater ponds in the northwest corner and at the intersection of the west and east channels and with the Caspian Promenade that Chris mentioned and adjacent to the future large parks. Small ecological patches are strategically placed throughout the plan area to not only increase benefits to urban ecology, but also create meaningful open spaces for the surrounding neighborhoods. These spaces are all interconnected. The Discovery Way Greenbelt and the east and west channels will connect the district in the north-south directions. The Caspian Promenade will create a greenbelt connection from the stormwater ponds through each of the biodiversity hubs and on to Baylands Park. And the diagonal and a new network of streets and pedestrian laneways will create a matrix of smaller ecological connections throughout the plan area. All right. So now I'd like to go in a little bit more detail on a few special locations. First up are the east and west channels. The east and west channels represent great opportunities to work with Valley Water to integrate open space, urban ecology, and flood control to improve the matrix quality in Moffett Park. Here's the approved 360 Caribbean project. And similar to what is being proposed in the plan, Google and the city and Valley Water have worked together to implement a new way about thinking about the channels. The buildings are set back from the channels to create a 355-foot building-to-building dimension. In between the buildings are ecological spaces, trails, and pathways, and open spaces for visitors to inhabit. The plan will look to increase this type of landscape along the channels. For the West Channel, the plan envisions a continuous, publicly accessible open space that is 240 feet wide. The open space will include a north-south multi-use path, areas for increased planting and habitat, and areas for passive recreation. In addition to the publicly accessible open space, the plan is recommending buildings be set back from the open space to increase the habitat quality of the area and also provide opportunities for private open spaces that take advantage of the new green belt. The proposed standard in the plan is to create a corridor that expands the existing 85-foot wide right-of-way to our 300-foot building-to-building dimension. This will add 7 new acres of open space for a total of 12 acres of open space along the channel. And that does not include the areas I mentioned before that are part of the Google 360 project. The East Channel is different from the West Channel in a number of ways. First, on the east side, there are high-tension PG&E transmission lines that have their own setbacks and easements. Unless the lines are undergrounded, the plan cannot change the required building setbacks from those lines. On the west side of this channel, there is a city stormwater ditch in addition to the East Channel. This is within the Valley Water parcel. The plan is proposing an additional setback for buildings to create an additional public open space and increase the terrestrial buffer from the East Channel to a full 150-foot dimension. In the plan, the proposed building setbacks are roughly in line with where existing buildings are located adjacent to the channel. This represents about a 378-foot wide greenbelt corridor that is approximately 20 acres in total open space between Caribbean and 237. As part of the study session, we look forward to hearing your feedback on these proposed setbacks for the East and West Channel. All right. The other unique area we would like to inform you all about today are the existing stormwater ponds in the North Lockheed area. You see here outlined in green. To give you a little more context to the future of this area, I would like to take a second to point out its future connectivity to the south through a new street and greenbelt corridor connecting to Discovery Way and ultimately over the proposed Mary Avenue overpass into Peary Park. Our research over the past few years has identified this area around the stormwater ponds as potential wetlands and riparian areas. Because of the identification of these sensitive habitat areas, the plan is proposing to implement an ecological overlay zone to create a terrestrial buffer to the identified wetlands. SFEI has identified 3 categories of terrestrial buffers. At 100 feet, a buffer will primarily serve to improve water quality. At 330 feet, a buffer will improve habitat quality for a diverse subset of wetland species. At 650 feet, a buffer would be more comprehensive in support for wildlife and plants. We also understand there are competing objectives of the plan, and while in an ideal world, a 650-foot buffer adjacent to a sensitive habitat may be warranted, here in Moffitt Park, we do not feel it is feasible considering existing development, infrastructure, and allowed land uses. We would also like to point out that the area identified in the pink box and all the areas south of First Avenue and the Yahoo development is already improved area and developed with existing uses. These areas will not show any CEQA-related impacts if redeveloped at a higher density since they are already developed areas. So here are the recommended plan policies we would like your feedback on tonight. First, the plan will implement an ecological overlay zone over the existing 85 acres of wetland and stormwater area. We are also suggesting to expand that area to include an additional 17 acres of open space on currently developed land. This would implement the 330-foot terrestrial wetland buffer on the southern edge of the wetland area and a 200-foot wide buffer along the existing channel. Together, the ecological overlay zone will create a multi-purpose wetland, stormwater management, and public recreation and viewing area. No new buildings will be allowed within the new ecological overlay zone. Future development will be restricted to areas of approximately 30 acres in size, identified in yellow on the diagram. And here's that summary of the policy behind the ecological overlay zone. Again, roughly 330-foot terrestrial buffer around the wetlands, 200 feet around the Lockheed Martin channels. There will be no new buildings within the EOZ, and there will be special design considerations for the area. So again, this is just one of the feedback points for today's workshop. And I will now pass it back on to Chris to close on the open space network.
Thanks, Chris. You want to go ahead and go to the next slide? So taken as a whole, the proposed open space network will be integral to the transformation of Moffett Park. And together with streets and pathways, retail activity centers, campus and residential open spaces, the public parks and open spaces will create a vibrant and innovative public realm. As part of the implementation of the plan, we anticipate that some of the parks will be dedicated to the city, while others will be developed as part of campus or residential areas as publicly accessible private open spaces. Next. The proposed plan sets the stage for the creation of a high-quality public realm that realizes the goals we outlined at the beginning of the presentation. And as I noted previously, throughout the process, the city has coordinated with key property owners to identify open space opportunities. Most of the open spaces illustrated with solid tones in this exhibit have been identified as part of those discussions. Those with the dashed lighter tone of pink, the neighborhood parks, are general recommendations for the location and scale of neighborhood parks. Next. The recommended policy for open space within Moffett Park is consistent with current city policy, which is 5.34 acres per 1,000 residents. The proposed specific plan includes 20,000 units and assumes 42,000 residents, which would require approximately 224 acres of open space, or approximately 16% of the total area. Next. If the plan were implemented as proposed conceptually, it would meet this policy by providing 80 to 85 acres of natural areas or ecological patches, 45 to 50 acres of greenways and ecological corridors, 25 to 30 acres of community parks, 50 to 55 acres of neighborhood parks, and 15 to 20 acres of mini parks, plazas, and paseos to create a balanced and diverse mix of spaces and experiences. Next. So the quantity of open space is certainly an important measure, but equally important is the location and distribution of open spaces. One of the key policy objectives is to have a park and open space within a quarter to half mile or 10-minute walking distance from all of the major residential and mixed use districts, and really throughout the entire plan area. And so the proposed plan locates parks within that designation. You can see here the blue dashed lines indicate, the smaller ones indicate a quarter mile, and the larger ones represent a half mile walking distance from each of the major parks within the plan or the concept plan. And so that's another key factor in the overall design of the plan. Next. So stepping back at a higher level, that really concludes the open space and ecology presentation. And really among the most important considerations for council are the conceptual open space network and the target for publicly accessible open space.
Thank you, Chris. At this point, we're going to hand it back to Chris Senseneg, and we're going to do the next set of Mentimeter polling. So here we go.
Thank you. So if you still have the menti.com browser open, you can go back to that. If you do not, please go to a browser window and go to menti.com. And the number again is 1334-5267 to provide feedback. And I'm going to switch screens here. I'm going to attempt to. Yes, here we go. All right, starting off. Just to get your pulse here on what you've seen today. Are you satisfied with the open space and ecology concepts presented today? And there's a few different points where you could provide feedback on this. One is the mix of open space types. 2 is the inclusion of recreational multi-use sports fields. The 4th one is refined building setbacks requirements along the channel. And lastly, the ecological overlay zone buffering the waterfront. All right. Seeing generally people are on the satisfied side of the scale. This is great to see. All right, thank you for your feedback. And the last question here is, are there other open space types or ecology topics that this project should consider? So this is an open-ended field to receive your feedback, thoughts, and ideas around open space and urban ecology. All right. Well, thank you for these suggestions. This will continue to stay open, so we'll record all these as we go through. All right. I'm going to switch screens again and then turn it back over to Michelle. But start thinking of your questions for the roundtable discussion, and we'll get back to Mentimeter in a moment for you to give your overall questions for the roundtable discussion.
Thanks, Chris. So I've discussed a couple times during the presentation what's upcoming, but the policy discussions that we intend to bring to council either in this format or a similar format in the next couple months would include land use, mobility, and then a full meeting on community benefits and affordable housing. So right now we're in the process of developing the draft, with the planned draft being available this summer. And when this draft is available, then we will also schedule some community outreach events, and the draft will be presented to council the Planning Commission and other commissions. I also just want to remind everyone that today's presentation had a lot of information. All of it is conceptual. There's no plan yet, so we're looking for feedback. That's the whole purpose of the meeting. So I will hand it back now to Chris to start the roundtable discussion. This is a 30-minute period in which people will be able to use the Mentimeter tool in order to ask questions of the panel. And I think the next slide shows the panel, so I can introduce who's in the meeting room. So we have city staff, including Trudy Ryan, the Director of Community Development, Chip Taylor, the Director of Public Works, Connie Barcelis, the Assistant to the City Manager, myself, and on the consultant side, we have Chris Sensenig, who you've seen tonight, Eric Yurkovich, also with Ramey and Associates. From CMG, we have Chris Goulard, who you've heard from tonight, as well as staff from the San Francisco Estuary Institute, who have been consulting on the urban ecology aspect of the plan, including Robin Grosinger and Karen Verbeet. With that, I'll let Chris set up the room for the roundtable.
Great, so going back to the Mentimeter. I have now made live the ability to put in your questions. So please go to menti.com. Again, the code is 13345267. And I will start going through the questions. And as you put in questions, there's also an opportunity to rank questions and give them a thumbs up. All right. Let's see. So the first question here, it's kind of bouncing around. Let me see if it stays in one place so that I can read it. The Bay Trail near Lockheed has scary signs forbidding activities such as photography. Will these restrictions be removed for areas near or outside Lockheed secure areas? I think I can speak to that one. As part of creating the ecological overlay zone and the open space north of Lockheed Martin, their secure area will be shrinking in overall size and location. So there will be new sets of rules for the ecological overlay zone areas that we were speaking to.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll just re-emphasize that the ecological overlay zone would have public access. And there's currently a series of fences that make it impossible for people to leave the Bay Trail and enter into Moffett Park at that north edge. So the end result would be creating access there and removing those fences. And yes, they'll be reducing their secured campus south.
Let's see. The next question is, what are the plans to provide safe crossings for bike peds, particularly channel trails to cross Caribbean Drive and crossing of North Matilda? Michelle, do you want to answer that for the city, or you want me to give it a shot?
Yeah, I think you could take that one. I would say that regarding channel crossings, I would like to note that we have spoken to Valley Water and conceptually have some not agreement, but alignment and a potential additional crossing of the East Channel to serve that far east area that we foresee as being residential and mixed use. And I think that would be a pretty big win as far as connectivity. But Chris, if you want to talk about the North Matilda, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at, more connectivity across Matilda. There are limited opportunities because of the light rail, but we'll be looking for safer pedestrian crossings there. And the other part of this question is about Caribbean Drive and also some of, I guess, the connectivity of the channels to the area south. Chip, do you want to take on Public Works plans for that, or?
Yes, yeah, certainly I can take that on. Chip Taylor, Public Works Director for the city. On some of those where we haven't got into full design for those, but at the end of the day, we have been looking at the potential for either like hawk signals, or in some cases, there might be a traffic signal there to be able to cross and to be able to push the button to get across. So we're very aware that we don't want to end a trail into the middle of a roadway and have a long distance to kind of get around to another signal. So we are looking at lots of different options to try to get across there safely.
Thank you. All right. The next question is, will the parks be public or publicly accessible?
I could take that one. So the open space network for the plan area is going to be a combination of amenities. And we have many property owners and stakeholders that have already engaged in our team and with our team, and we've discussed potential improvements that would be publicly accessible. They most likely will not all be owned by the city. They will most likely serve city residents and be publicly accessible, but be maintained by the private property owners. We're also working with another consultant team led by Mindy Craig. It's called Blue Point, to come up with a strategy for implementation in the plan area, which will most likely include some sort of instrument like a community facilities district, so that the parks have consistent signage, maintenance, and have amenities such as bathrooms, and work together as a network as opposed to separate privately held properties. We want it to feel like a complete network, that it's all open to the public and consistent in what it's messaging. And this is something you see in many other cities, and most users of the parks wouldn't know if the property is privately held or if it's publicly held, because it will feel like a public amenity. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Michelle. The next question is, the location of the full-size flex or flex field adjacent to the east and west channel bio seems to conflict with the Eco Promenade. How would an active field with lights work with this bio district? I don't know, Chris, or Michelle, you.
I think if Chris Gillard is available to talk about if there's a way to make this sort of active field be a component to an more eco-friendly area, or if that's a conflict, it would be good for him to weigh in.
Yeah, I'll touch on that. The portion of the park where the flex field is recommended is actually offset from the west channel by a significant distance of probably about 400 to 500 feet. And so there's ample room for the ecology around the channel itself to have a buffer from that more active use. I would also note that all of the multi-use flex fields that we're proposing as part of the policy are really intended as more flexible spaces that can be used for, any range of kind of more informal recreation. They're not intended as designated active recreation fields, and they will likely not include any sports lighting. The intention is that they're going to be more of a park space that's integrated into the overall landscape.
The next question is a little bit more of a comment, I believe, but can't Twin Creeks be used for large sports field? Michelle, I'll let you gonna take the out of the role of twin.
Yeah,
So I'm
Twin
happy to take that if you want. This is
Yeah, why
Trudy.
don't you go ahead? That'd be great.
This is Trudy Ryan, Community Development Director. Twin Creeks property is owned by the county. However, they lease that to a private entity which runs the Twin Creeks facility. And they do have facilities for soccer and baseball, softball. So they do have a variety, but it is a private concern. It's not public park.
Thank you, Trudy. The next question is, what are the plans to reduce invasive species, in particular feral cats? Robin or Karen, would you like to talk a little bit about how the urban ecology matrix impacts invasive species?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Well, yeah, in general, the plan is very strongly oriented to emphasize native plant species and, reduce non-native plant species and thus support native birds and insects and ecosystems. So as one of the slides, I think that Chris kind of pointed out, the cats issue, feral cats issue, I would say at this point in the planning process, this is not something I'm aware of that we've developed specific policy measures around. I imagine that will come up further on in the process. Michelle, is there anything else to add to that?
That's most likely going to be a program in the plan. And I will say that the cats that are in the plan area, many of them are fed by people who work in the plan area. So part of it's going to be education. Part of it's probably going to be partnering with some advocates for feral cats and having them trapped and relocated. But a lot of it has to do with education and what's happening in the plan area right now is that there isn't a lot of information for the public about what cats mean and how feral cats operate. So I think it's a good thing to bring up, and we'll definitely put it on the list of items that will need action for the future.
Thank you. The next question relates to sea level rise. How does the plan take into account sea level rise and associated flooding along the channels? And the other channels in Sunnyvale have high flood walls. Michelle, do you want to talk about our work with Valley Water?
Yeah, we've been partnering with Valley Water on the plans for the east and west channel setbacks. And unlike the project that Google has implemented at Caribbean, the current setback concept for the east and west channel do not remove the flood walls. They really create an open space along the channel and retain the flood structure that's there. So they're as far as that question goes, that isn't part of the plan currently. We have been working with the consortium of agencies and stakeholders in the plan area to continue to support the levee improvement process through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we'll continue to work with that group, and hopefully will get prioritized and funded in the near future. But we also have quite a bit of conversation and potential policy over other types of infrastructure in the plan area that will help to reduce flooding in Moffett Park, especially in the south area of Moffett Park, including green infrastructure and retention, and some of the improvements that we're talking about as far as eco patches and open space will also be resilience measures. And I'm not to say that we couldn't consider working with Valley Water for some improved aspect of those channels and flood improvement in the future. But right now, those flood walls are not being proposed to be removed. I don't know if Chris or Robin also want to speak to that issue.
I think I'm good. There's always opportunities to continue to work with Valley Water if the setbacks are required for future the future locations of the flood walls. Going on to the next question. The next question refers to how do you plan to get both habitat areas where people are not allowed and active areas where people need to play and recreate? So Robin, I think I'm going to pass this one to you, and Chris, you can talk to this also about how an ecological patch works with other public open spaces.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I can start, and then Chris G can follow, excuse me, with some of the numbers, how it actually adds up. But I think the fact that there's these setbacks adds a significant amount of acreage, and some of these dedicated areas we're already aware of. Chris can maybe explain the accounting a little bit more. But I do want to emphasize that the the more ecology-oriented parks are not do not exclude people from them. They're more of just a different kind of experience for people. It probably won't be quite as active. It'll be more of a contemplative or nature immersion experience with boardwalks and overlooks and trails. But they are part of the open space network, and they're just adding a different type of experience. So they're part of the human experience in a really important way. So that's part of the answer to that question. Chris, do you want to add in terms of sort of how the numbers are working?
Sure, yeah. One important thing to note is that the ecological overlay zone is approximately 100 acres in total. And so that is a large biodiversity hub where there will be public access, but in a very limited way, mostly around the periphery and out to the Bay Trail. And so that's one large area where you will have a clear separation of more active uses and the ecology. Two other areas of the east and west channels are also, I think, important because those are really focused on mobility and habitat. And so there will be, far fewer active programs within those green belts or ecological corridors. The majority of activity will happen in the smaller neighborhood parks, urban plazas and squares, and the community parks, which are located more within the residential mixed-use districts of the plan. And they represent a smaller portion of the total area. But as Robin noted, even within those, there are important opportunities to integrate urban ecology into these more active spaces. So you can really have places where nature and people mix successfully at different scales. And that's I think a key part of the vision here.
Thank you. And I'm going to just go through a few more of these questions. One question is there technical analysis, including studies for groundwater? Yes, we are working on that. Another question was about how we determined how many residents will will the 20,000 housing units produce? We looked at Michelle, maybe you can talk to that more, but we looked at a number of precedents throughout the region and the city, and landed on an average of 2.1 residents per housing unit, which is how we get to that 42,000 residents number and the 224 acres goal.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. I think that explains it, but I will just make a slight note that the 2.1 is just slightly lower than the current city of Sunnyvale average, and the typology of housing in the plan area will be multi-family housing, and typically would have a slightly less number of residents living in it than the city's average, which has a significant amount of single family homes. So I think we're being pretty conservative on the number of people. It could be less, but I think we're taking a conservative approach to make sure we plan accordingly.
Thank you. The next two questions are associated with kind of the implementation of it, and I'll just read them here to start. Most of your open spaces are on private land. Are they on board with this, as their involvement will be essential to A, achieve the open space, and B, provide it in a timely manner? And the second question is, how is all this open space and parkland to be funded? Initial acquisition, development of the park, and long-term maintenance.
So I can speak to that a little bit, and then others can chime in. So yes, we've spent over the last year working really closely with stakeholders, especially stakeholders who own large segments of the plan area, and working through where open space would be appropriate. And we have been really fortunate in that we have a plan that is acceptable, at least in concept, by these property owners. We will be having a whole study session in the next couple of months that focuses on community benefits and affordable housing in the plan area. And the Moffett Park specific plan model is very similar to other plan models in Sunnyvale, in which there will be a community benefit element to developing projects, and the community benefit will most likely result in some priorities, including open space and affordable housing. So that is a really important topic, and one that we will probably spend 3 hours talking about just on its own. But we have set up and have begun the discussion of how community benefits will result in the needed open space, and the acres that we showed today are ones that folks in concept thought were possible. Of course, there is always going to be nuances, and we haven't shown today planned or developed parks. We've shown ideas of where parkland could go, and which we know that it would fit. And so there's lots of work to do on developing what is in the park and how the park functions, and that's coming.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I had a question and then I lost it it was bouncing around the queue. All right, the next question is, can we have a native plant garden throughout the area where people can help plant and learn about the natural plants and butterflies and bees that attract it? Thank you. I think that's more of a comment. I do want to address this, and this ties to a number of questions here. And Robin, you might be able to speak to this about policy around native vegetation in the plan area. Or just the fact that we will have a planning palette that addresses.
Right. So yeah, that would be an anticipated component, I think, of the plan is a palette that is strongly weighted towards the native plants and trees, that gives a consistent kind of style of plants. There's still a lot of variety in there, but that leads to both sort of an aesthetic consistency and really drives biodiversity. And we know that that's one of the major factors of supporting native birds and insects and pollinators and bees and butterflies, and is the presence of native plants. So that's one thing that can make a huge difference, and also be kind of a leadership move by the city. And I think there's some really great examples already in the district of what that looks like, and uses less water, a lot of positives around there. And I love the idea of that being an educational opportunity, a way for people to learn and share resources around that. That really was just kind of a movement right now to support, native species and biodiversity crisis.
Great, thank you, Robin. And I found the other question that this went with, and it was, will there be a plan-wide coordination to guide vegetation actions by all property owners to be complementary with building biodiversity across the area? And as Robin mentioned, the answer to that is yes. Okay, we're almost out of time here, but we do see that there will be other, there are other questions that we will review and go over.
Chris, I want to just give me an opportunity to remind people that we're having the office hours on the 15th at noon. So we can bring this list of questions to the office hours and try to answer them there as well. You can also just attend and ask new questions if you didn't get a chance to ask your question during today's roundtable. So with that, I know that we allocated 30 minutes and we've gone over. So I think we're ready to move on to the study session portion of the evening. With that, I can, oh yes, also we can leave these questions up or bring them up at any point during the study session if council would like to see them again. So with that, I'll ask the mayor if I should be handing this off to the mayor or the vice mayor and to start the study session.
I'll go ahead and start the public hearing portion of this. So we'll open the public hearing on this item. Since we remain in a virtual setting, I'll ask the public to use the virtual raised hand button or dial *9 on your telephone to indicate that they wish to speak. The city clerk will then ask you to unmute your microphone when it's your turn to address city council. City clerk, do I have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. First up is Jeff Holtzman, followed by Stephen Meyer. Jeff, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the city council.
Great, thanks. First up, good evening, Mayor Klein, Vice Mayor Cisneros, and members of the City Council. I'm Jeff Holzman, Real Estate Development District Director for Google in Sunnyvale. First, I'd like to start by thanking you, city staff, and the community for all the work and feedback on the Moffett Park specific plan to date. Given that time is limited tonight, I just would like to point out that while our Caribbean campus open and green spaces are intended to be welcoming to the community and offer increased public access out to the bay, after reviewing the city's illustrations that show a community park right outside of Caribbean and the ecologically enhanced West Channel, I'd share some of the concerns about having a park with athletic fields right there. We agree with the city that there needs to be areas for active play fields and recommend that they're located closer to the new residential neighborhoods. We'd like to ask that the city's consultant team work with us, as they have done on other topics, to find a place where a play field can become a beloved and integrated part of the neighborhood. We continue to be excited about the wonderful opportunity to support more walking, biking, and interconnected parks, which will create a more equitable and inclusive parks network in Sunnyvale. All of this is top priority in addition to the unique opportunities we have for real ecological impact around the Eco Park and the East Channel. I could offer a few other comments on the channels, but there's a lot of great things in the plan we already love, and we want to make sure it's a plan that can be built. We hope we can continue to work together to make it even. A lot of details to come and work to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. And before you leave, I did have a follow-up question. So I saw from the Promenade standpoint that the Promenade, especially connected up on the West Channel, just south of the Caribbean project, and whatever the concerns about a field there. I understand that from the West Channel standpoint. Did you have any concerns about the East Channel or also an adjacency there?
Well, the East Channel as a possible for an athletic field there, if we're reading it correctly, it's in that area that we think of as an eco park and an opportunity for real enhanced habitat sort of creation right there. So I think we'd have a little bit of concern about an athletic field there too. I think that it's just about sitting together and working where it could fit in the right places of the plan, and what comes next with the land use map still to follow is important to figure out where the right places for these things might be.
Okay, absolutely. And as a reminder to council, if you have any questions of any of our speakers tonight, please raise your virtual hand. Thank you.
Next up is Stephen Meyer, followed by Juliana.
1 second, you did have a hand go up. And it is from Councilmember Hendricks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is, I guess, to Jeff, but it's also to staff. I'm trying to understand if someone were to show, because it's very much related to this particular question. If we were to show slide 37, because that slide shows this the west channel with the Google property as a future large park. But I think there's already entitlements and construction has already happened to that's not going to be a future large park. So I'm just trying to understand it's to staff, and maybe, I wanted to do it when Jeff was still there. Is slide 37 reality, or is it visionary?
I'll take that question, Councilmember Hendricks.
And if someone could show the slide so everybody know what we're talking about.
Yeah, Chris, if you could find the slide and I'll start talking until there you go.
Right there.
So the notion is that as we explore implementation of the program, there may be situations where a developer, property owner has a site not on that current property they want to develop, but elsewhere, and that they'll be offering community benefits of a variety of sorts in a different manner than we usually see it. We usually see it right on the same property. So with Moffitt Park, with large ownerships, with a smaller number of property owners, it gives us the opportunity to sort of mix and match in a different way. So that's an implementation step that we haven't gotten to, but that would be the notion behind that.
Yeah, but I just want to be clear. It's really hard to look at these maps and go here for everybody else. The west channel here is on the left side of the slide, and there's two purple boxes on each side of the channel that says future large park. And those spots, because of the construction that's already going on, are never going to be large future parks. Is that correct?
So no. So south of Caspian is not part of the current development that is Caribbean. So there's a portion of that purple area that is not part of that current development. And a large park is certainly still possible in our conversation with that property owner. It may not be a large park based on their desire with a multi-use flex field on it, but they have expressed interest in having the current entitlement be part of a larger park. But south of Caspian is currently not part of that development, nor is anything east of the channel. So that large purple square that's east of the west channel is not part of the current improvement.
Yeah,
And then
it would just be good to understand, because is the intention that large future parks are going to go next to office space, or are we intending to try and have them closer to residential?
We're trying to have them closer to residential. We're limited in some of the areas that have the opportunity for that. At the east side of the plan area, that large park would have residential right up against it and would be part of a residential neighborhood. And there isn't the same newly developed project next to the east channel purple area than there is at the west side. So I understand why you asked your question, but I still think there's lots of opportunity to even pull in parts of the entitled open space that's currently entitled with Google's Caribbean project into a larger park network. What that large park contains is another question.
Okay, I'll save my questions. I didn't know if this conversation was going to go anything where we needed any other comments from Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Stephen Meyer, followed by Juliana Pendleton. Stephen, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Hello, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I'm very excited about this plan. I think it's wonderful. I especially like the removal of street and the promenade, but I'm concerned that this be a public accessible area and not just a corporate park. In order to make it publicly accessible, I think there needs to be a high priority on public bathrooms. There needs to be bathrooms within a certain distance because, you know, there's people that have needs, kids, seniors that have needs to use the restroom. If it's far away, then it'll make it less accessible. My other big concern is pedestrian crossing of Caribbean. Caribbean right now is not crossable at all, except at Borregas. I would really encourage you to consider a grade level separation, either a bridge across or going under. Of course, going under is a problem with the flood zone, but having pedestrians cross the same level of cars will result in pedestrian deaths. So I really encourage you to consider alternatives for how to get pedestrians and bicycles from the south side to the north side without having to cross with cars zooming around. Because the north side has all the bay access. There's beautiful birds, access to nature out there. If there's a huge barrier that makes it unsafe, then people won't cross and it'll become a corporate park. We want to have a public park, publicly accessible, public amenities, public access. Thank you, Google, for all the work that you do. We appreciate you. Good night.
Thank you, Stephen.
Next up is Juliana Pendleton, followed by Mike Cerrone. Juliana, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening, Mayor Klein and council members. My name is Juliana Pendleton, and I am the Environmental Advocacy Assistant for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I would like to first thank council and staff for holding a study session dedicated to open space in Moffett Park, as well as thank Google for engaging with local environmental groups throughout the plans process. I had the opportunity to learn about Google's plans on a handful of occasions, both during public meetings and through tours of their site. Moffett Park can become a model for a place where development and habitat protection and enhancement are integrated. The Moffett Park specific plan poses a unique opportunity to bring nature to urban development and establish a true eco-district. If done right, it could become a template for the rest of the region and beyond. With this in mind, I would like to ask Council to please prioritize strong dark sky and bird safety measures for the entire plan and to follow the San Francisco Estuary Institute's recommendations. Over 200 bird species reside in and around the plan's site, both migratory and native species. Please protect these birds, their habitat, and expand habitat for our local wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Mike Cerrone, followed by Rashmi Sharma. Mike, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening. Overall, I think the vision presented looks great, and it's really continues to be a very exciting overall project for the city. Regarding the open space, I would hope you would, I would encourage you to look at the Plaza neighborhood parks, the Greenbelt, the smaller connected parks rather than a big sports field. Although I think there were some comments that there were more flex fields, but I don't think we want to park with all of these. I think we want them to be accessible to all of the public all of the time, particularly people who work and live there. Going through the parks to get from one place to another is very important. I think widening the channels is absolutely a no-brainer. These are beautiful water features for people and wildlife. An important part of that is for the developers to get credit for that open space if they are privately owned but publicly accessible. That's a very important part of it. And please approve the Caspian Promenade. It looks wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Rashmi Sharma, followed by Eileen McLaughlin. Rashmi, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening, Mayor Klein and council members. My name is Rashi Sharma, and I am a high school student and member of the Environmental Action Committee for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Thank you for highlighting biodiversity as part of the plan's open space goals. In my lifetime, I expect to witness the greatest loss of biodiversity in recorded history. The latest IPCC report warns that biodiversity loss and degradation are already key risks for every region due to past global warming and will continue to escalate with continued global warming. Recent mapping efforts, published last week in the New York Times, show that in the United States, California has the most biodiversity to lose. While climate change contributes to the expected loss of all life forms, other drivers focus on land use, lighting, and the way humans interact with nature. So I ask you tonight to do your part in directing the Moffitt Park specific plan to prioritize strong bird safety and dark sky standards for Moffitt Park and follow the San Francisco Estuary Institute's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Eileen McLaughlin, followed by Greenbelt Alliance. Eileen, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Klein and members of council. I'm Eileen McLaughlin with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. And I'm really pleased tonight to see this plan and see how much thought has gone into it using principles that were in the urban ecology technical report prepared by SFEI. That's been very heartening. I am also heartened by the eco overlay for the wetlands, and given we're the Citizens Committee that works with our shorelines, that is especially nice to see. But I don't want to forget that biodiversity depends on wetland ecosystems mixing on the shoreline and further with other ecosystems and the biodiversity that's supported. I really do hope that that can be pursued through implementation of so many of the ideas that were suggested here tonight. I'd like to support Jeff Holtzman's comments about the sports fields because active recreation doesn't quite work with that. But I also want to leave you with the thought, what if future Sunnyvale residents and employees could be doing bio blitzes and bird watching in this area, monitoring the results of really working on putting this all together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Greenbelt Alliance, followed by Gita Dev. Greenbelt Alliance, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening, Honorable Council. First off, I'd love to echo the thanks to the staff and consultants for their excellent presentation. Another thanks to everyone else for taking the time tonight. My name is Justin Wang, and I'm a lifelong Sunnyvale resident and the advocacy manager at Greenbelt Alliance. I'm also a sustainability commissioner, but speaking strictly in my own capacity. Greenbelt Alliance is an environmental nonprofit that encourages both the protection of open space, the promotion of climate resilience, and climate smart land use decisions. I'm thrilled to hear that the diverse course of stakeholders and residents that have spoken in favor of the vision outlined by staff. This is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to address a range of issues. We have chronically underbuilt housing, neglected our urban canopy cover, which exacerbates our climate crisis, and inequitably provided access to nature and open space. The promise of an eco-innovation district has the potential to address all of the above. By providing dense infill housing and ensuring easy access to a diverse range of open spaces, we benefit from an incredible range of benefits that city staff have already done a great job outlining: biodiversity, climate adaptation, and community health. As a city that has been consistently ahead of the curve, I hope that we can continue that trend by visioning Moffitt Park as the best that our city has to offer. Climate resilient with dense infill housing that enables rich urban ecology while providing ample access to open space and nature. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Justin.
Next up is Gita Dev, followed by Kenneth Rosales. Gita, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening, Mayor Klein and council members. My name is Gita Dev. I'm speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter tonight. I want to compliment the staff and the team on all the work that's gone into the open space, and particularly heartened to see the setbacks along the creeks, along the flood channels, and particularly the existing wetland area north of Lockheed. I have a couple of very specific comments. One is that in the existing wetlands area north of Lockheed, I noticed that there's a new pathway connecting to the Bay Trail. In SFEI's recommendations, it's really, really important. This is a flood retention area as well as an existing freshwater wetlands. Putting a path through it brings people closer in proximity to the habitat area. So we really need to try to avoid that one penetration. The other is that Jeff Holzman had brought up the point that play fields and habitat areas are sort of at the opposite ends of the spectrum. That we do not have trees in play fields. And so we really need to keep the 224 acres of open space to have both the playing fields, but also the habitat areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta.
Next up is Kenneth Rosales, followed by Vince Rocha. Kenneth, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening, council members and mayor. My name is Kenneth Rosales, and I'm the Planning Senior Associate with SV at Home, an affordable housing advocacy organization that works across Santa Clara County. We want to thank the council for your leadership in studying the potential for up to 20,000 new homes and the opportunity to transform parking lots and office buildings into a neighborhood accessible to all. Given today's focus, we want to ensure future MPSP area residents be protected against the impact of sea level rise. This means that a comprehensive plan regarding sea level rise avoidance, adaptation, and mitigation strategies be in place before it even becomes a problem. Future tenants and visitors deserve to enjoy all the benefits of ecological upgrades that the current plan envisions. This includes enhancing the East and West Channel Creek trails and the bike ped network to access those trails. It also includes implementing SFEI's Ecology report that integrates the urban environment with environmental sensitivities of the area under its urban biodiversity framework. And lastly, stronger bird safety for the area that the citywide policy may miss. The city will need to consider securing sufficient funding sources for environmental mitigations and all other key community benefits, especially deed-restricted affordable housing. This is an opportunity to create a future where we can bring justice for all dimensions of concerns without the need of trade-offs, including but not limited to housing justice and environmental justice. Thank you for your time, and we'd like to thank the staff again for all their hard work on crafting this very complex plan. Thanks.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Next up is Vince Rocha, followed by Theresa Ong. Vince, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Vince Rocha, Vice President of Housing and Community Development with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. There's been so much effort and work into this plan so far, and it's really heartening to see the environmental sustainability efforts put into this, and also giving the public access to parks, trails, walking and biking, all within this plan. One thing I would comment on is there is merit to looking at alternatives to large playing fields, small community parks, linear parks. My sister lives in Sunnyvale next to a linear park, and having more parks near you means you're likely to use them. I would say large format parks often attract more regional visitors, folks coming in via car rather than accessible to residents via foot. So accessible parks on your block are really key to this plan to making sure there's a high quality of living for residents. We're excited to see the potential for affordable housing. And again, also really seconding a lot of the issues of ensuring that it's all environmentally sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince.
Next up is Theresa Ong. Theresa, you've been unmuted and you have 90 seconds to address the City Council.
Thank you, Mayor Klein and council members for this opportunity to speak and participate. My name is Theresa Ong and I represent Foothill College's Sunnyvale Center. We're really excited to hear about this plan and we would like to offer support for this new vision and plan for Moffett Park. The plan spoke of education and programming in this area. I'd like to offer our Sunnyvale Center as a possible entryway and education center for such programming. We are also in the nascent stages of creating a community garden with plots for Sunnyvale residents on our site, as well as a discussion with Magical Bridges Foundation to locate a smaller version of Magical Bridges on our site. One critical area I feel that needs to be improved is the Matilda intersection, as well as where VTA stops are currently. It's not particularly walkable, especially for the current residents of Morse Park to access this area. We look forward to collaborating with you some more, and we want to bring this to fruition. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
And Mr. Mayor, that was the final public speaker.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll come back to council for questions and comments on some of the issues that staff wanted to bring up. So I'll leave it to council to order that accordingly. Staff, if you can pull up before council starts asking questions, the list of feedback that you're looking for from council, just as a reminder. And I don't remember what that page number was off the top of my head.
Yes, 1 second.
Yeah. Chris will pull that slide up.
Okay. I appreciate that. Does council have any questions or comments? And you can probably take that down. First up is Councilmember Larson.
Thank you, Mayor Klein. So I wanted to start with a question. This is regarding the flood walls along the east and west channel. This is, I think, the first time that I heard that we were expecting to keep the vertical walls there. Somehow I had it in my mind that we were going to try to do something similar to what Google has done with their Caribbean project, to just have more of a naturally banked experience. Although when I look at the cross sections on, let's see, it was slides 56 and 58, it looks like the flood walls that you would experience if you're walking on the trail next to the channel would not be the full height of the wall. It would be maybe 3 or 4 feet high. Could you tell me a little bit more about the thinking about why we think that we still do need to have the walls, and are these cross sections to scale?
Well, I'll speak a little bit on the wall issue. You know, the first thing we need to consider is the setback for development. If there's any chance to remove or reduce the walls, we need to be able to have the future buildings set back a distance in order to provide that kind of improvement. So, you know, that was our first step, is thinking about these large areas that would then become publicly accessible and improved ecologically. I will let Chris Sensenig from Ramey talk a little bit about the future thinking and including the idea of reducing those walls, but that is something we would need to work with Valley Water on. And it's really an implementation. It would take a lot of consideration and engineering. So what we presented today to you is a new concept. That's the first step, but I think Chris also has something to add.
Yeah, so the drawings are diagrammatic. They're to scale horizontally, but there's a lot of questions on the grading, and it changes throughout the section. So they are, sorry, I forgot to turn on my video. So they are diagrammatic. And as Michelle said, like the first step here is if we get direction to have this 100-foot setback from the top of the bank, then that opens up the possibility for a different section on where the walls exist. But without that required setback, then the walls will need to go in within the Valley Water property. and in the locations that they're currently planning for them.
Okay.
But this would just be the start of a process, an implementation process.
Okay. Yeah, you know, I think it's important that we don't have tall vertical walls along here that, you know, block the experience of someone who's using the trail. For example, not being able to see the channel, see over. You know, if it's one thing if the wall is short enough that it's easy to look over. It's another thing if it creates a real barrier, visual barrier. So I think that for me, that's going to be important to understand how that develops. And I do understand that there are engineering considerations. I'm very supportive of the setbacks that are being proposed along the channels, and would, you know, like to understand what the opportunities are for just, having that be a positive experience for the public, while at the same time protecting the region against floods, because that's absolutely essential that we have, that we protect against that. So that was my main question. I'll save my comments for later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hendricks.
Well, based on that, do you want comments and questions now? Do you want me to be able to try and separate questions from comments?
Try to focus on questions if you can. Although I definitely
I'll go last. It's I got more comments than I have questions, so I'll go later.
Okay. I think most people now have Councilmember Melton.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Mayor, can you hear me okay, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Hey, I just had a couple of questions, Michelle, from Foils 20 and 21. And Mayor, I'm going to turn off my video just to conserve bandwidth, but I'm still here. And okay. Michelle, on 20, I made a note to myself. It said privately owned, publicly accessible space counts as open space in the Sunnyvale Municipal Code. Did I write that down correctly? Is that correct to say that if a private owner creates publicly accessible open space, that it counts within the rules of the municipal code? Okay, all right. That's good to know.
And Trudy might want to add to that. I don't know, Trudy, if you want to add.
Let me just add that it depends. So we have given credit. We've given 100% credit in some cases, and we've given partial credit in other cases. It really depends on what the function of that open space is otherwise. And I'll give you a couple of different examples. We have Redwood Square with the city line development that got partial credit. And then we have the soon to be completed open space by Lakeside, by the new residential and future hotel that goes around the perimeter of that lake, where it was all private before and is now going to be open to the public. So those are two different examples.
Okay, thank you for that, Trudy. And I heard one of our members of the public advocate that private landowners, when creating publicly accessible open space, should receive credit for that. It just feels to me like that's a topic that folks are going to want to discuss. So I'll put down a marker on that. And then Michelle, on foil 21, I made a note to myself that said, landfill open space does or doesn't count as open space. And I got to thinking about the clay shells over the closed landfill. And are we saying that that does or doesn't count as open space, or was I misunderstanding foil 21?
So the landfill is outside the Moffitt Park specific plan area. So it isn't included in the 224 acres that we've put together in the proposed conceptual open space network. I would have to refer back to Trudy or Chip if it was counted as part of open space for the city's open space plan or the Parks of the Future plan. For the purpose of the Moffitt Park plan, it isn't part of our open space network, although there are lots of open space benefits to it, and people do use it as open space who are inside the plan area.
Okay, I'll leave that as sort of a semi-open question that I'll follow up offline, Michelle, with Trudy or Chip. And that's it for me, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll actually continue on that question. I had one of the questions when you went through that slide earlier today, and I know it's outside of the Moffett Park specific plan, but you specifically called it a special designated open space. What does special designated mean? Trudy, Chip?
I'm going to ask Chip if he can help out.
Which area you're specifically talking about?
The landfill. So basically, at the landfills, it's designated, or at least it was called out as being specially designated open space.
Yeah, I was looking at my open space list because we have like a full inventory of the full open space list, and I'm not sure. Actually, I think what we have on there is we have the West Hill, the South Hill, and the Recycle Hill are actually included in our open space. So that is all included in our total amount.
Okay, so it's just standard open space.
It's just standard open space. That's correct.
Perfect. Okay, and then one of the questions, and so just a general question. We talked about biodiversity and eco districts. We didn't talk about canopy or trees, and I know that kind of plays hand in hand with that. Is Canopy Goals part of this discussion tonight? Or, I didn't see, trees called out or canopy called out anywhere in the presentation. And I'm trying to just get a better idea of, is that for future note or having a tree? Go ahead.
Yeah, we didn't include it in the presentation tonight. It will be in the specific plan, and we do have a strong urban forestry plan for the plan area that will include canopy goals and will include ecologically appropriate palette for the plan area. So those will be in the draft plan that are coming and will be part of that draft plan review. And we really get down into the details of the plan itself. As far as the target, I think the draft plan that we're working through right now is a 30% target, but that will be something that we come back to you and have a conversation when we really walk through what the plan is looking to achieve in the draft plan review.
And I appreciate that. So that glad to see that that's there. And then when we start talking about trees, is there a target versus from a species standpoint? We have in going through Moffett Park, just running through there this weekend, there's a wide variety of some old growth trees and some relatively smaller trees have been planted. Beyond kind of canopy and shading, do we also have kind of a biodiversity focus for the goals of those trees? What the intended sizes will be at the end of the day, as far as the mixture of future trees versus, I'm assuming we have some sort of inventory that we'll be going into with this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Robin Grossing here is here from SFEI. I can also speak to it, but I will say that we have a planting palette that will include native species and with preferred size planting. And one of the reasons why that native palette, it'll probably be a little bit of a broad native plant palette, so we want to make sure that we have the diversity in the plant area that meets the needs of the species that live in the plant area. So birds and other small animals really will do much better with having the species that relate to their diet and habitat needs. So I don't know, I think Karen and Robin are also here. Maybe they can just weigh in a little bit, because I know this is an important topic to many of the folks that have been following this process.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for the question. That's a great question. Yeah, I think we have, in the draft, pretty ambitious canopy goals that would meet biodiversity and heat targets for health and biodiversity. And yeah, a key component is emphasizing native trees, a diverse range of those, because that's really going to drive biodiversity. Also, it is an opportunity both to increase the amount of trees in the district, because it's a very low amount of trees right now, but also make a more resilient forest. So we're looking at climate change and what species are going to be tolerant in the future. We also do have the advantage that the groundwater is relatively high, so that's going to allow a lot of trees to benefit from that and grow relatively fast and be healthy. Kind of a nice advantage of this area. And then also emphasizing, you kind of brought up larger trees to the extent possible, because they do so much more than the small trees that you see, which don't provide much shade, much carbon storage, much benefits. So, but that does mean kind of emphasizing enough good quality soil and space on the ground provided for those trees, so that you can put big type species in and they will grow in a healthy way and get big and strong. So those are all key elements that we're thinking about.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, and it kind of goes to potential multi-use field locations. So that's page 46 of the presentation. So if you can pull that up for just a second, I think it'll help in at least how my question is phrased. So from this, and I think we focused especially on the full size flex field, and I'll have some comments later about the West Channel one. The second, let's say the full size field that is farther west. So the orange star that is on the far left of that presentation. What's adjacent to that? How is that currently programmed in from a kind of an overview standpoint? One of the things that even in your goals you talked about was the need for conceivably a school adjacent to, or school facilities, and we've talked, and this isn't the night to talk about school facilities, but that is one of the kind of the long-term goals. So, and I know that this field as defined there isn't on the promenade as it's been previously called, but just trying to get a better idea of how staff chose this site for the field.
I'll start, and then I may have others chime in. So the full size flex field that you see that's not on the Caribbean site is actually currently on the Navy site. And that particular site will eventually be based on the current, very draft land use plan, would be a mixed employment area of office and other types of uses. North of that area is planned an activity center and residential development that could be up to 2,500 units. I will say, just to give everybody a sense of scale, a full-size field is almost 2 acres in size. So it's a really significant amount of ground to provide for a high school level soccer field or football field. Going back to your other question about the potential school sites in the plan area, and we're not going to get too far in school sites today because that could really be a whole meeting into itself. But we do have a stakeholder who's given us the very tentative okay of a potential school site where that smaller field is along the East Channel. So, and the reason why it's a smaller field is because that school site would have to support a school, some public park, and some fields for the school use. So a 2 acre field would be very difficult to achieve on that east side when we know we have a potential elementary school site. But going back to the Navy site, I think there's a great opportunity for a large field there. We are working through what those uses will be that surround it. We're also working with the water board to make sure that there aren't any potential conflicts with any previous uses there for an open field. So far, we haven't heard of any, but that is always something to consider. So hopefully that gives you enough information. I don't know if Chris or either Chris, because we have several Chris's on the call today, if they want to weigh in on those topics.
covered it. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
Okay. And then finally, if you could pull up page 53. So keeping what we just saw in mind, and this was kind of going back to the questions that came from the public as well on Mentimeter, and as well as kind of what we just talked, or what Councilmember Hendrick's question was, as well as just some general questions. Just looking at the kind of focus of the biodiversity, let's say, bubble near the West Channel in that main field, yeah, and just seeing how it kind of overlaps, and that's kind of just the general question of it's not just on the channel, it's kind of overlapping with this field, and that I think becomes the bigger question of when, why I raised the question with Jeff, and just raising the question here. You're seeing kind of not just along the channel in that area, and similarly, at least kind of where the smaller multi-use field is on the East Channel, there's kind of a bulb out of biodiversity. And to me, a bulb out of biodiversity kind of conflicts with an active field. And so that's my only question. It's like I understand, the Lockheed site now, so I appreciate that. And that gives me a better understanding, because it's parking lot, it's building, whatever, and conceivably it's where housing is. This focus on biodiversity next to the field still raises a question. And does this slide really capture or what that vision would be, or would if there was an active programmed, full field there, that bulb out of biodiversity actually have to shrink, at least from kind of the east side of the West Channel, or conceivably the west side of the East Channel, depending upon what those fields sizes are.
Yeah, I think it would be really good if Chris from CMG could speak to that a little bit, if those two things are mutually exclusive, or if there's a way to have those two things coexist. But also, this is really one of the reasons why we brought this topic to council, because there's a lot to consider in what sort of the priorities of the plan area are, and what fits where. And those 2 acre, the larger field sizes is a lot of ground to achieve. But I'll let Chris Villard speak a little bit on the issue.
Yeah, sure. So with specifically about the West Channel area there, as I mentioned earlier, the distance between the proposed general location for a potential field in that location is several hundred feet. And so there would be a significant buffer between any kind of a flexible field use and the actual channel itself. Certainly a large open lawn area is going to be less biologically diverse than other types of landscape treatments. And so that is certainly a policy direction that we need to understand the priorities for, and find the best place within the plan, I think, for a flexible field that could be used not just for sports, but I think importantly for larger community gatherings like festivals and things like that. And so the idea behind these multi-use or flex fields is not that they are designated athletic facilities, but they are more open lawn areas within a park setting that could be used for different recreational and social activities like picnicking, frisbee throwing, that kind of thing. And so I do want to make that important distinction, is that what we're not envisioning here as part of the policy recommendation are designated soccer fields or designated baseball fields. So I hope that helps clarify.
Absolutely, that does help. I still have a little question about, that overlap of use, especially looking, zooming in on that map and then comparing it to basically comparing 53 and 46. There's always questions, but I appreciate that answer. So I think that is all of my questions. So let's go back to council for direction and answering some of the questions. So before we go to final comments from council, can you again pop up the final direction that you're looking for from council for all the questions? And we'll do that for another 10 seconds or so, and then council, if you can raise your hand and start giving some final comments. Okay. First up is Councilmember Hendricks.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, to everybody who's been working on this is a ton of stuff that you guys have presented. And I can just appreciate how difficult it is to take your hundreds and hundreds of person hours of what you're doing and try and consolidate this down to a piece of information for us. So thank you very much for that. The first thing I want to say is that the 5 acres per 1,000, that's an absolute requirement for me. Where we see, other cities might have 3, acres or whatever. The 5 acres per is an absolute requirement. That's table stakes for me. It has to be that. There's a lot of reasons for it. A, we want to be able to make sure we're providing that much open space to our community, but it also makes a difference for what we have in terms of our park dedication fees that we can go ahead and get. And just so everybody understands, we're at the 5 acres per right now, which is the maximum. We're at 5 point something. And that the way state law works, if you ever go below 5 acres per, that's your new maximum threshold. You can't go below 5 and then build some extra park space somewhere and raise it back up as it relates to our dedication fees. So the 5 acres per is an absolute requirement for me. In terms of timing and stuff, we can't do anything that's going to delay the completion of the plan, the report, or what we need to do to be able to approve this for what goes on. There's been some discussion about, a lot of discussion about the sports field size and where they are and community parks. And one of the things, and especially the last comment just said, well, here, maybe it's a festival gathering or something like that. If that's how we're planning on it being used, I also want to be able to understand what is the parking access for that. Because when you start talking about a community park or a festival access, this is something you're talking about. People are coming from other places. And I want to understand how people are going to go ahead and get to that, how parking works and things like that. And you can't tell me everybody's coming from using light rail because light rail isn't in the rest of Sunnyvale. If you're south of El Camino, you can't get on light rail to go ahead and access those points. So it's not only the space, how big these fields are. If we're truly going to have this designation of community park, whatever that broad definition is, it seems to me there's got to be a definition or a clarity around how people from not just the Moffett Park area are going to be accessing this. And I just wouldn't buy the answer that says everybody's coming by bicycle. I know we're talking just about parks and open space right here, but as I look, every time I'm seeing this stuff, I can't just limit myself to this piece. And when you're asking me here, do I like something or not like something, I'm constantly looking and going, here, how does this relate to the housing map or the office space map or what we're doing for the bike and pedestrian access pieces and stuff. And part of that goes to, I really need more help to understand the finances of something like this. Because at a macro level, how this is all going to get done is we are going to maximize the monetization of some acres of this area so that they're expected to pay for the parts, the acreages that is not going to have monetization. And I hope everybody understands what I'm trying to talk about. That, the developers of this land out here, I'll just pick a number and say, maybe they've got $50 million worth of things they're going to go towards community benefits, affordable housing, park open space, or things like that. To get that monetization, we're going to have to give those developers other things. We're going to let them build more or something like that. But the thing I'm even more concerned about is that, again, these are just numbers. These aren't real numbers. If the developers of this land have $50 million worth of community benefits they can do, I think our appetite and the appetite that our residents have is $100 million worth of those community benefits. And I think we need to start understanding what are the constraints, if there are any constraints, to being able to provide all this open space. And then when we start talking about affordable housing and down the road, it's nice. And I understand why we're having to talk about bits and pieces of this, but it's when it's all going to come together, because that's when those constraints are going to come crashing up against each other for how this all goes. On the East Channel setback things, I guess this is a question. Would I be correct in thinking that what the cross section of the East Channel is going to end up looking like right close to the bay or the Caribbean, and what the cross section looks like towards 237, could those be different cross sections and how it ultimately ends up looking like? That's a question to staff or someone.
Yeah, I think, there's lots of questions of exactly what happens within the open space area for that cross section. And it certainly can have different characters depending on its location.
And then specifically in the East Channel piece, I think one of the constraints we're having to deal with is the overhead line, high voltage lines that are there. Is that correct? And again, yes, that's just another example. I think that's something that can be, quote, easily resolved if somebody had enough money to go ahead to pay and either move or underground the high speed, the high voltage lines, and that would let us radically change what that looks like. But again, that's just where finances are going to play a big role in what that can ultimately look like. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so regarding the undergrounding of the high tension voltage lines, it's a good point. That would add a considerable amount of open space to the plan area in the future if we were able to underground them and open up that area as an improved area as part of that setback process to the East Channel. So council knows we've already started engaging PG&E in a conversation about what that process would look like. And it will most likely be an implementation program in the plan itself to study the cost of implementing undergrounding the utility and the process that would be required. But that is an excellent point, because if they did get undergrounded, it would add about 32 acres of public open space to the plan area that could be improved and be heightened ecological habitat than what it is now. So
yeah, and again, to me, I'm glad we're doing the study to figure out the actual steps of what it would take. But I mean, I don't need a study to know that would cost a lot.
It will cost a lot.
I can get that one right away. And that's just, again, one of these examples of the constraints we're going to run up against about here. There'd be a great desire to be able to do that and be able to get open space and 30 plus acres, ... but against what cost and what else we might or might not do with that money and where that money might come from. So again, I just want to put that out there, is that's part of this broader thought process we have to do about all this.
Can I also just inform the council that, we had strategic economics provide a couple studies already on the feasibility of Moffett Park. And one of the things we're waiting on right now from them is what's called a pro forma. And the pro forma will provide details on what kind of value will be added with the change in the land use for the plan area. And then that value added will be part of that very detailed discussion with council when we talk about community benefits and affordability. And it would drill down right to what Council Member Hendricks is speaking about, is where will that money go in the plan area? What will be the priorities? So it's coming. Just want to make sure you know.
And again, I'll just say, we're going to monetize, there's going to be monetization. And the question is where it's going to go.
Councilman Hendricks, I just want to point out that the undergrounding PG&E transmissions lines not only could provide more usable open space, but could also expand the actual developable area.
Right.
Because currently, so it actually can provide not just open space, but more development.
No, I get that, but just my simple question is, who's paying up front to make it all happen so that those things can occur? And do we have the commitment at a time when we're signing off on the plan? Right? Because that's what it all comes down to. I'm sorry, this is actually a good question. Should I be viewing everything we saw today? Because I've heard people refer to this both ways. Did we see a plan or a vision? How do I view the last 2 hours of what I've seen?
You saw concepts.
Okay.
And the concepts will use your feedback to develop a plan.
And that's good, because I just want to say to all the members of the public who said the word plan, it wasn't. And what I'm really worried about, what I think we're seeing is artist renditioning kind of drawings, concepts of what can be. And I'm trying to make sure I understand the actual way we can deliver those things. And so we don't end up with artist renditioning of one thing and then the reality doesn't match what that could have been. And while I'm on,
if I could just add, I think your question is great, and I'm glad you asked it. I just also want to say that they're not concepts that were developed just without a lot of data and background and information and conversation about what we would be trading off. So
yeah.
It does have a lot of thinking behind it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then just because I'm on questions, so it was mentioned about Mary Avenue. So what is the expectation in terms of the option, since it was set, kind of referred to that it would be done, what option does this vision or criteria assume, and in what time frame?
So the option that assumes is still preliminary. So we're using the concepts of the city's preferred plan, which is 2 different plans, and we are coordinating with Mary Avenue with the modeling. So as far as when we get to the mobility, you will see a lot more details about Mary Avenue. But in this particular section, there wasn't a whole lot of information we needed to put this together. I don't know if Chip wants to talk about that at all, or.
No, I don't want to add anything more. I think you got it.
Okay, but the one thing I would like to know is whether, because the option are, it's either, here you get, bike access, or maybe you get some road access. The question is where somebody thinks they're going to get funding that would have it done in what decade? Because I'm not aware, whatever we pick, I'm not sure how it's going to get funded. And that brings me to this question about the Caspian Drive piece and change. And I'll just say, I actually need more detail about this. And Kent, maybe this is to you. Would it be possible, and you don't have to answer right now, that maybe I could get somebody from the traffic planning department and or planning to maybe take me out? And this is just one of those things I'm remembering from my time on the planning commission, of being able to see, go out and do site visits. It might be nice to go out and actually understand, we're talking about how we're going to move these roads and what it might look like. So that might be something later on I could ask if we can do that offline. I just think that would be helpful to me. And then a comment was made towards the end here about, well, here we can grow really big trees because there's a low water table. Is the water table out there, is that fresh water or salt water?
Sorry, fresh water.
It is, really?
Yeah, the salt water is, further out towards the bay.
Okay, so do we need to, so does that mean we don't need to worry about, for all the landscaping and all the acreages of park and open space we're going to do, we shouldn't be worried about trying to go ahead and make sure we expand the purple pipe out there to go ahead and water any of this stuff?
I wouldn't say that. I think we still need, but bigger trees which can reach down and take advantage of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would think from a policy perspective, since I don't think there's anywhere else in the city of Sunnyvale that is closer to the water pollution control plant, we should be factoring in that all this linear or whatever space that's out there, we should make sure we try and find a way. And again, this is just one more cost for that we need to go ahead and get born. We should be making sure we're trying to hook it up so that it gets purple piping to be able to water this stuff. And then I'll just go ahead and close, and I'll go back to my very first comment about 5 acres per is an absolute table stakes for me. We need to go ahead and find a way to go ahead and make sure we're counting linear space or whatever smaller areas towards all that park space. But let's not go so far with making sure we count everything that we end up with, a huge amount of just small little pieces of green space that don't add up to something. So we've got to find a good balance of being able to have the linear park space, whatever medium-sized park space or field space, connective tissue for all this stuff, to make sure we absolutely maintain the 5 acres. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for letting me kind of merge questions and comments together. But fantastic work being done by the team to take all these divergent, conflicting, complex things and put something down where we can go ahead and see them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Councilmember Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question for Trudy, and then I'll get to my comments. So Trudy, you mentioned earlier about giving partial credit on privately owned, publicly accessible open space. I was wondering, what is the criteria that we use to figure out how much credit is given? What's the process for deciding that?
So there's not a precise formula that we use. We do look at what the other uses of that that land are. For example, we have another area where there's a little pathway that connects property between El Camino and a parallel street, and they needed that area for an EV for emergency vehicles. And in that case, it didn't count as open space, but it didn't count against the densities that they could achieve on development of the site, because it still was needed, but they made it available to the public. So we really do have to look at if it's a dual use space or if it's intended, let's say it's a plaza in front of an office building. Is it going to be primarily during the day for the employees of that building, and then weekends and lunchtime or something, it would be available to a different group. So we really would have to look at each situation. As we work through it in Moffett Park, I'm suspecting we'll end up with more guidance on what counts, and is that, in some cases, if it's an office development, they don't have a requirement for open space as residential does. So that credit is against something else that they might be able to do. Whereas if it's residential, that credit may be towards the park dedication. So I don't have a good formula for you, is what I meant to say.
That's fine. And that's actually a helpful answer, because I was imagining, for example, a project goes to Planning Commission for final decision and they get to just pick a number out of the air, and that just creates too much uncertainty. So if we can develop some guidance as we go forward and create some more certainty around that, I think that would be very important.
Absolutely.
Because we are talking about so much open space. It's very different from like a small little path that's a minor part of a project. This is really a major feature of the whole plan. So yeah, that seems important to me. So over to my comments then. So I too am very impressed with all the work that staff has done to pull this together, boil it down to this. There's so much thought that has gone into this, and certainly just from the answers that have been given tonight, gives me a little bit of a window into the process that staff has gone through to get to this point. And I overall feel like this strikes a good balance. While these are concepts, they are grounded in actual conversations that we've had. I realize that nothing is final, but there is, I hate to say reality, but yeah, there is potential reality here. Nothing's committed yet, but we're moving down a path that appears to be feasible and achievable, and that's very important. And it also feels to me that we are iterating here, that we're getting closer and closer to something final. And that's really how we have to tackle these big, complex projects, is to just knock off a little bit at a time here and there and work towards something that finally converges at the end. I do think it's important that staff continue to talk with the property owners about some of these potential privately owned open spaces and the uses that go there, yeah, to continue to have those conversations. I know the map that was presented was conceptual, but I hope that there are still going to be opportunities to, there might be opportunities that we hadn't thought of, or different possibilities. So can stay open to those conversations. I agree with Councilmember Hendricks that keeping 5 acres of open space per 1,000 residents is absolutely the minimum, and we need to achieve that or greater. Having been through the process of raising our park dedication fees in the past, it's made me acutely aware that if citywide our average drops below 5, like let's say citywide it went down to 4.5 acres per 1,000 residents, then on future new projects throughout the city, we could only collect park dedication fees equivalent to 4.5 acres per 1,000. So you can get into this downward spiral where you're just not collecting enough money to keep up with the parks. And, you know, some of the money that we collect, some of it goes to land acquisition. Sometimes we get land in lieu of a fee, but some of those funds we actually have to spend on improving parks. So we're not able to use 100% of the fees for acquiring land. So it's very important to me that we keep that number above the 5 acres per 1,000, which is the maximum we can legally collect through our park dedication fees. As far as the multi-use fields and the full-size field, I'm especially fond of the multi-use fields because I think they can get more day-to-day use for pickup games or just a variety of maybe not even sports, but people want to have a picnic with their family or walk through there. So yeah, I know it would be difficult to get even one full-size field, and I'm fine if we only get one. I don't want to derail this plan to try to get more full-size fields. And even, you know, one field, if we don't quite get to the full size, but instead have a number of more dispersed, smaller multi-use fields, I think that is appropriate. I really do like the focus on connectivity and putting these spaces throughout the area, because that's how people actually will use this area when they're living there and working there. So keeping it dispersed and also connected is very important to me. Let's see, what else did I have? Yeah, we've already talked about the setbacks along the channels. I mentioned that I'm supportive of what's being proposed there. I do want to understand a little bit better where what our options are for the flood channel walls, and especially not having really high concrete barriers that I think would not go with the character of the kind of community that we're trying to create. So those are all the comments I have. If I think of something else, I'll circle back, but I believe that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Cisneros.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'd like to start off with of course, thanks to staff and all of the partners in this project for the work that's gone into this. We are dealing with a limited amount of space, you know, a relatively large amount of space when we're thinking about a large project in Sunnyvale. But I think what I've heard as I've been digesting the community feedback and then feedback from the landowners and from the rest of council is that something that we can come together and agree on is that being ecologically focused and focused on recreation while also figuring out how people can move and live there effectively is of key priority. And so I appreciate the focus that's been paid attention here. So I have here a bunch of notes, and so I'm going to go over them. And if I may ask staff at the end of my comments, if there's something that I haven't quite touched on or requires more elaboration, if you could please ask that of me, it would be helpful, as there were a number of questions that were asked, which I do appreciate that staff is now asking us specific questions. I think it makes our meetings much more productive and helpful generally. What I appreciate about the plan with open space is that we have something that looks contiguous, that we can focus on the biodiversity and ecological needs of the natural habitat and wildlife that already exist within that area or could then flourish. And thinking about how our plans there and the way that we design this community can support those ecological goals. So, you know, when I was looking at these maps, I was looking at the ways that the open space that isn't necessarily available to people, but with you know, trails around it, connected more within the entire plan worked. And I really appreciated that. And the thought given to that. I had mentioned that very early in the process is something that was important to me. And I was really happy to see that continue to be part of this plan and process. And then I would also like to call out the importance of public-private partnerships when it comes to open space and park space. We as a city have, you know, policies and limited resources to be able to sustain large park space. And so we are also in a unique position in Sunnyvale where we have really great private entities that are willing to contribute to the community. And I always am looking for opportunities to incorporate those partnerships into these plans to benefit the entire community. So to the extent to which we can call upon our corporate partners to contribute financially to build these and then sustain them over time, I am very supportive. And as we finalize the plans through this conceptual process that we're going through now, to emphasize the fact that this is a way for our corporate partners to contribute to the overall well-being of the city, especially as we build out communities like Moffett Park. So as far as the East and West Channel go, especially the East Channel, we've been talking a lot about walls and barriers and the character of keeping that space perhaps open to trails and to pedestrians. If we have large walls and there are major concerns around having people use that space, if there are large walls, then that makes it hard for me to kind of think about, well, how useful is that for people then to utilize that space? We want to make sure that we're keeping that usable and enjoyable for everyone. So to make sure that while we are expanding it to the width that we need in order to support the needs of our stormwater and flood water from the bay, also making it very usable and enjoyable for all people. I am not in agreement with having walls and just really being mindful of that design and connected to how we can support this space ecologically and for the use of the people who are going to be around there, both who live there and visit. And then I wanted to touch on the sports parks. Having multi-use is really important to me, especially we touched on the area of high schools. And I've discussed this in other meetings, and I look forward to continued discussions about it. But thinking about different designs or conceptualizations of schools outside of what we would see as like a homestead high school where you need a lot of acres to have a functional education environment. Making things multi-use allows us to have more flexibility as we continue those discussions about how that might or might not work within this specific plan area. So I would encourage continued exploration of multi-use to allow us that flexibility to continue to explore different ways we can use our space and then integrate the needs of our community into how we plan the rest of this area as we get into more of the nitty-gritty specifics, who's going to pay for that, where it's going to be, what the community needs, and what is feasible within the current plan when we consider the contributions of the city and then the contributions of the landowners, and where we can come to an agreement where that works all together in terms of community benefit. So let's see here. Parking is a really important discussion. because I know if we build this to where we are conceptualizing it as being a very usable, attractive, and functional space, people will want to come here. And that's a good thing. We want that. So something that I want to make sure is considered as we plan for these spaces that will attract people from outside of this direct area. I appreciate the 10-mile walking radius. I love that as an ideal concept in terms of building people-friendly cities, people-friendly communities. But we also have this great commercial space that requires parking. So to the extent to which that parking can be shared, not just with those communities, those corporate communities and corporate entities with office space, but sharing that along with public parking space at either different times or designating different spots so that we have, we're maximizing the use of the parking that we're able to put in Moffett Park without having it dominate the space. Let's figure out how we can, in every case, use the space we have in multiple functions. So building these highly desirable places near places where we already have parking is going to be key. And I think that can kind of minimize the need to use valuable space for large swaths of parking, whereas we could use that for more green space or other uses as well. That's something I would like us to continue to think about. In the realm of getting credit for park space or open space, if it's something that somebody is completely paying for and maintaining and building, okay. But the multi-use conversation is going to be there. And we've already discussed that at some length, which I think really illuminated our city policy around that. And I want to make sure that, credit is given where credit is due. The 5 acres per 1,000 people, the way it has been discussed, we can't go ahead and negotiate down for the rest of the city if that's what that means in Moffett Park. So we want to keep that 5 acres there per 1,000 people from my perspective. And that's what I've got from my notes. Is there anything else that staff needs from me that I haven't quite touched on in my comments?
No, that was very comprehensive, unless Trudy has something, but that was very helpful. Oh, if you wanted to weigh in on the ecological overlay zone, that might be good to hear any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I want to make sure, well, I'm still formulating my opinions on that, to be honest. So if I can touch base with you and staff offline about the ecological overlay zone, I have a lot of competing thoughts and I feel like I could go on for another half hour about that, which is kind of why I left it out of this, to be honest. I would appreciate taking that offline. And then, of course, sharing that later with the community as well in future conversations.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Thank you very much. That's the conclusion of my comments.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Next up is Councilmember Dean.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you so much to staff on just leading such a fantastic session and on obviously such a fantastic presentation and all the work that has been done. And I think obviously we're balancing such important needs here. And so to some of those various topics that we've touched, to start off with, when it comes to those different fields, I think I also concur with a lot of what we've heard here tonight, that it's important that we have those fields, but I find my preference leaning more towards the flex and multi-use ones than necessarily the full ones. And a lot of that I think has to do with the interconnectivity of all of the different open spaces that we have adds such a powerful asset on a macro level to this. And so not limiting ourselves to just big areas, but also looking at those multi-use areas, I think is really important. And I think there is a need for fields, but what's important is that we find the right spaces for them and we make them close to residential. I think one thing I've looked at on this is that they are closer to commercial right now, especially with some of the proposed fields. And while that's, it's obviously we're trying to fit different puzzle pieces here, I think the priority should be given to getting them closer to residential, because that's where they best serve a collective sense of space and a sense of place. And if that means that we have to, lean more towards flex and multi-use, then I think that that is an okay trade-off. And along with that, I think it's really important to just work with the private owners in that area to find that best area. Working with them to find out where it best goes, because I think Councilmember Hendricks really highlighted early on in his questioning that some of the places that we already have there for fields, there's already construction happening there, and it might not be the best place. So working with the private owners, I think, is really important. But on some of the other topics, like I said, the connectivity of it all is super important and vital. I think one thing I really appreciated was that idea of walk sheds, and that staff took that into account. And I think the fact that we have different types of open space leads to a better walk shed ratio of how far people need to walk to get there. And I am definitely a fan of the removal of the roadway for that conversion into open space. I think it looks very beautiful. I think it makes the space stronger. And I think that Councilmember Larson really made a savvy point in regards to falling under our acres per resident, and how that if we fall under it, it hits the financial modeling of it. So keeping us at 5 acres, I think, is also very important. I fully agree with that. So those are a lot of my thoughts. A lot of it I agree with what already been said, but that's my thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Councilmember Melton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Klein. Once again, I'm going to turn off my video just to conserve bandwidth and make sure there are no hangups here, but rest assured I'm right here. And I'm going to just go through my notes, which may hopscotch around a little bit, but I think I'm going to touch on all the points that staff asked. And I wanted to start off by talking about community park and the fields. And I know from our Parks of the Future from years ago, the policy document, we're looking for 2 new community parks. And I think that's what we're starting to see envisioned here in Moffett Park. I find myself preferring that we would end up with 1 community park and then use the land wherever it may be available for a high school. That's sort of where my priority comes. And the mayor absolutely nailed it. Tonight is not the night to talk about a high school, but that's sort of the prioritization of land use that I come up with. And then I'm really torn about the concept of the sports field. If we're talking about a sports field that is for football or baseball or soccer or cricket, that just does not resonate with me personally in terms of what I think the Moffett Park vision statement is all about. I get it. We're studying to put up to 20,000 residential here, but nearby we have Twin Creeks, and I heard everything Trudy had to say about Twin Creeks, but that is a facility that exists. We have Baylands Park, and yes, I get it, that has restrictions, but that's another major open space. And then just a bit to the south of the Moffett Park District, we have a brand new renovated Fair Oaks Park that will have a lot of open field capabilities to it. So maybe I'm in the minority here, but in terms of, major sports fields or even multi-use or flex fields, I'm really feeling less than excited for that sort of usage in Moffett Park. But I would say a community park is important to me. And so if that has a multi-use field on it, okay. And then also very high priority to me is a high school. So let's keep going on my list here. The channels, Michelle, on the channels, yes, 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 everything, yes. Wider, better, and serving its intended purpose, but also for the riparian use. I understand completely everything that Councilmember Hendricks said about who's going to pay for all of this. But if I can conveniently put that to the side for the moment, I'll say I also want the high power lines undergrounded tomorrow, right? Let's conveniently put aside the money thing. Michelle, please keep going at full speed on whatever conversation it is that you're having about putting the high power lines underground. Keep going on that. Next, I want to talk about the eco overlay district, and I really have some mixed emotions on this, and I will follow up with staff if I'm having a fundamental misunderstanding. But here's what I think I heard from the staff presentation is that an expert told us that on the northwest corner by Lockheed, that an expert would put an eco overlay zone of 650 feet, I think is what I heard it said, right? But there were sort of wavy lines of semi-concentric circles that sort of graduated from the shoreline, and that's where the expert would put it. But then we said, well, things have already been built, and so instead we want an ecological overlay district, but it's not going to be where the expert would put it, but because things have already been built there, we would put it at 330 feet away from the wetlands, plus another 200 feet from the Lockheed channels, or something like that. I'm probably misunderstanding some of it, but my point is, I want to advocate for the eco overlay district, turn the knob all the way to the right. And I get it, things have already been built, but I want the overlay district maximum potential size, and to me that's 650. And so if the ecological overlay zone is created, and that means that no new things can be built there, or we have to do some stepping around with regards to CEQA, because I think I heard somebody say that a previous CEQA analysis allowed the things to be built that's there. Okay, I get it. But my bottom line on the eco overlay district is turn the knob all the way to the right. And I want that size as large as possible. Still going through my notes, a member of the public mentioned dog parks. That resonates with me. So I'll just endorse that concept as something that's of interest to me. I heard Michelle King talk about something that's referred to as a community facilities district. I'd like to learn more about that in due course, and I'll just harken back to something that I've said consistently all along, that there are no alternate governance structures in the Moffett Park Specific Plan area. The only governance structure is Sunnyvale City Hall and the City Council. So as long as the Community Facilities District, whatever that is, doesn't trip over that tripwire, then all good and well. Councilmember Hendricks made an interesting point that, are we talking about a plan or a vision or concepts? And Trudy's response is that we're talking about concepts. I think my recollection is correct that when we say 20,000 housing units, that's not a done deal. That's something that we're studying for CEQA, and that the final result may be something up to 20,000 units, but not more. And there's a relationship between the number of housing units, which has an inferred number of residents per housing unit, which then triggers the open space requirement. It's all mathematics built on a critical assumption. And so if we want to solve a problem on land use of where are we going to come up with the open space, one way to solve that problem is to reduce the number of housing units that we're going to put in, because that would lower the number of acres of open space that would be required. And I concur with my colleagues about we're not going to change the requirements of the municipal code for open space per resident. I endorse Mayor Klein's previous comments about tree canopy. That's important. I endorse what Councilmember Hendricks said about purple pipe and maximizing that. And I'll take it a step further, which is that we have a study issue floating around that would have the city overhaul its existing recycled water master plan. So I would say this is an opportunity to say to my colleagues, let's get that study issue across the finish line and overhaul our recycled water master plan. And then I'm just going to switch over to one other thing. Removal of roadway to create more open space and district connectivity. Yes, yes, yes. I've been to that road. I've seen it. It's has a lot of width to it in the right of way. And I think repurposing some of that would be absolutely a thing to do. And I believe that's the end of my comments. And if I remember anything, Mayor, I will circle back. And that concludes my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Larson.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just have a couple more comments. On the removal of the roadway, yes, I too am very supportive of that. Agree that that would be a great change for that area. On the ecological overlay district, I really like the concept of it because it provides more certainty and also transparency to our community of both for the landowners who are doing development, but also for community members on what to expect in this plan. So I actually, at this point, support the 330 foot setback. If we would expand that any farther, I would want to understand the quote unquote cost, because if we do that, then there's probably something else that we need to give up. It's not necessarily a dollar amount, but there's some trade-off that we're making, and I would want to understand what are we giving up if we're increasing that. On the location of flex fields, I do like having the majority of them near residential, but I'm also going to put in a plug for having some of them near office space. Having worked in an office building in the past where there was a soccer field down the street and there was an afternoon 3 p.m. pickup game among the employees, I think that can be a really good thing to have near offices as well, that people will make use of that during the day. And the final thing is I agree with Councilmember Hendricks about let's get this done. Let's not delay this project. I know that there's a lot that still needs to be done. And I really want us to stay on schedule and moving forward expeditiously. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hendricks.
Yeah, there were three things as I went back to my notes that I didn't speak of. One is the EOZ. And I think doing it is the right thing to do. It's clearly the correct portion of the area to go ahead and do it in. The trick is going to be, as both Councilmember Melton, Councilmember Larson were just talking about, well, where to draw the line of what goes on. I don't know that I'm quite there. Let's turn the volume knob up to 11 and go all the way. Because I do think there's going to be some kind of trade-off for wherever we draw that line. But I do think we should go ahead and try and do that. And let's find a way to get as much as we can. But to the way Councilmember Larson was just talking about, I want to understand what the cost is to go ahead and doing that. The second thing is, as we go forward with where we start to see some of these diagrams come together of housing overlays and open space and things like that, we keep talking about publicly accessible space. It might be nice if you guys define a color so we can start to see where those spaces are on the map. Because I think we need to distinguish publicly accessible open space from open space. I think they're just slightly different concepts of what goes on. And then the last thing I really meant to talk about this is, at some point, is staff going to be able to, or are they taking a look at and try and understand what Sacramento legislation could potentially do to our ultimate plan? And I'll just use SB 330 as an example and other things that are being done, that we can have this great, crafted thing where we've dealt with all this stuff, and then either existing or potentially future legislation from Sacramento could come in and say, well, you know what, somebody doesn't have to do that. And I'm especially concerned about this as we're talking about what is going to be the housing portion of this. This is just my opinion, but I think SB 330 is pretty much taken apart what our vision was for village centers and what's happening with them, and what developers or property owners can just go ahead and do. So that's just another angle of the puzzle I think we have to look at to be able to understand that we can have a great vision and put together and make all these compromises and fit everything together into a great community that we're going to have there. But the potential of what can happen with state legislation to disrupt that apple cart. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And let me give some comments. First, I just want to say kudos to staff and to the residents. This has not been easy, as we kind of put out a vision of what Moffett Park might be someday. And there's a lot of, it is the balloon at the end of the day where you're pushing one end and the other end pushes out. And so you're trying to balance all those different needs and all the different things that we're trying to do, focusing on biodiversity, focusing on open space and usable open space by people, and so I totally understand, staff has done a good job listening and coming up with possible proposals. I really like the promenade vision, so removing the roadway along Caspian and creating that promenade, which I do think is critical for that area. It's much like the JW Christian Greenbelt. I do think what you've done is create that linear park and with certain bulb outs of larger spaces, and then even the connections to the East and West Channel, make it, something that becomes a very viable active transportation. And just from beyond that, it becomes that walkable area throughout Moffett Park that takes you from one end to the other. I was hoping to see, a great concept to connect it a little bit farther west. That being said, I understand that there are limitations and what the different property owners, would like to see out there. I do think that and I'll second some of the comments that my colleagues have said. I totally agree with what was said about the 5 acres per 1,000 residents. It's like we need to maintain that level if that is critical. And so whatever we can do as far as creating open space in that area. Several comment, what we could do to underground PG&E, and I'd be interested to hear that coming back. That being said, I'm not holding my breath that we will find that money. And, the expense is such a great expense as far as, PG&E not really finding the money to do what they need to do, and just getting things done in our community is already difficult. So I would not hold any of this up on that. I do want to say, there was comments about a park with a festival. I do think that the smaller, multi-use fields have that concept, and I don't see a festival happening out there. If there's a festival that needs to happen out there, that's what Baylands Park is for. That's what dedicated parking and park space is actually there. I do see that a multi-use field in that area conceivably could be utilized for outdoor music, outdoor movies, but not anything to a festival level. And I don't know if we want that, although parking is adjacent, so it becomes easy from that standpoint. As far as programming, yeah, definitely the use of that linear promenade, and much like the JW Christian Greenbelt, figuring out where you want to put the dog parks, where you want to put the playgrounds, all that, where you want to put the exercise equipment will be critical. But that's the devil in the details. That's not for this specific thing. I know that staff will and the consultant will look at, yes, we need to add those, but those are amenities in that open space. We're focusing on the open space tonight. And from the questions that you put forth, I do think that in general, the topology fits correct. The removal of the roadway is exactly, the best way to create that linear park across Moffett Park. As far as the multi-use fields, as I said before, I do have a lot of worries about the conflict between, a biodiversity eco hub and an adjacent field. So from that standpoint, from a full size field, I'm fully in support of the far west location. I do think, especially if it's adjacent to office space, and especially most importantly, housing becomes a big thing. I don't know if it's close enough to whatever school would be there, but that's for future, as we've talked about before. And then as far as the other locations, definitely the one that's near the West Channel. I think, the farther away that you move that away, a small multi-use field farther away from the West Channel becomes operable. And then I'm not sure about, either side of the East Channel, but in the long term, conceivably there's space there. Although as you're getting closer to the East Channel, you're also now closer to Baylands Park as well as Twin Peaks. Or Twin Creeks as far as other opportunities from outdoor exercise and things of that nature. As far as setbacks along the East and West Channel, I think you have a good plan in place. I would like to see, as Councilmember Larson said, more of the increase in the riparian wilderness that we see at the West Channel. And thank you, Google, for that focus. And what you've created there is a model that we would like to see duplicated, throughout all the West Channel, all both the East and West Channel in Moffett Park. But it's, of course, at the end of the day, it's money. But I do think that trying to plan for a bigger concept of not just flat cement channels is a long-term goal. And I do think that needs to be part of this plan. Finally, in the creation of the ecological overlay zone, I think what staff here is done is a good kind of first step. I do think that it's difficult to de-zone something that's already been built. We can, and I appreciate that the landowner is saying we'll give up this portion of the land, but I would like to turn it up more if possible. That being said, there are lots of trade-offs and conceivably additional open space, and even basically relinquishing land where there's already buildings on, I do think is important, and I appreciate what the developer is doing as far as that's concerned. The proposed conceptual open space network seems very good. The only thing is I would like to see a connection, and conceivably that goes to transportation in the future, to the park that is, or to the field that is west of Matilda Boulevard. And then finally, the target of the public accessible open space. Yeah, I think we've done a great job as far as trying to meet our goals, and then also looking at that variability between what our residents, what the office workers are going to be utilizing, as well as what we want to dedicate to our biodiversity. And I do appreciate that. But going forward, I look forward to transportation, to getting into the details about land use. And I second what Councilmember Hendricks said about the worry about SB 330 and similar bills. And ultimately, tree canopy to me is very, very critical. We do have a good number of mature trees, especially along Caspian, along other portions, Borregas, and maintaining those and making sure that whatever we can do, if they are in the location of where things need to be built, hopefully, depending upon the species, we are encouraging developers to move those trees elsewhere on the property, or on their property, or elsewhere in the district as a community benefit. I think that basically summarizes my input. Still, we're looking at schedule. At the end of the day, we can't just go off and blue sky things forever. I do think that this is moving forward well, but we need to make sure that these meetings, and I appreciate the concept of these meetings, of going through the presentation, getting the community feedback, and getting direction all in one night. I do think that hopefully speeds this process along, and looking forward to our next session. So I think that covers all of my comments. Does any other council member have any final question? And question to staff: do you need any other questions to us that our council has not answered for you?
No, thank you for the detailed comments. I really appreciate everybody's thoughtful questions, and we got a lot of good feedback tonight. I'm sure we'll be following up with some of the specific requests and be sharing in the next couple weeks our schedule with the city manager, and hopefully be starting to schedule the next series of study sessions, which will really dig deep into some of the topics you touched on tonight.
I appreciate that. Okay, I see no other comments. And I just want to thank everyone who stuck through this, the public as well as the consultants and staff. It went a little bit longer, but I do think that we got some positive feedback and got through some of the open questions and hopefully gave the direction that was needed. Let's go ahead and move to adjournment. We will adjourn this meeting at 9:19. Thank you everyone for participating in today's meeting. Have a good evening. Good night.